Dynasties built on cousin marriages. You are seated beneath a heavy canopy and a dim chamber. A candle flickers near a tall mirror, its wax spilling into the carved grooves of an iron holder shaped like a lion's paw. The stone walls are draped with aging tapestries depicting strange scenes, battles that seem more like awkward family reunions, and weddings between brides and grooms whose family crests are nearly identical. You've just arrived in the 14th century, a world where nobility is currency, and lineage is destiny, even when that lineage loops in on itself. The idea of marrying your cousin today might cause a shudder, but in medieval Europe especially, in royal and noble circles, it was more than common. It was strategic. Entire kingdoms were held together through shared blood, and for the most inbred women of the era, this meant their lives were more than just trapped in castles or ceremonies. They were tangled in dense webs of political pressure, religious constraint, and hereditary fragility. To begin understanding this world, we must look at one family, the Habsburgs. Their lineage is a masterclass in genetic entanglement. Their motto might as well have been, "Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry." And marry they did again and again within their own extended bloodline. Their strategy was simple: use marriage alliances to gain territory instead of battles. Over generations, this tactic led to some of the most powerful yet genetically fragile individuals in European history. Take, for instance, Joanna of Castile, commonly remembered as Juana la Loca, or Joanna the Mad. Born in 1479, she was the daughter of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile. Yes, the very same Isabella who sponsored Christopher Columbus. Joanna's bloodline was already an entwined one, as her parents were second cousins themselves. But it was her marriage that complicated things even further. She was wed to Philip the Handsome of the Habsburg dynasty, a man with a nearly identical ancestral tree. Their union wasn't just a romantic link between kingdoms. It was a calculated move, engineered to combine Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. Yet it came at a price. Their children, especially Charles V, would inherit not only vast territories, but also an unusually high risk of inherited disorders. Charles V, ruler of both of the Spanish Empire and the Holy Roman Empire, suffered from a pronounced jaw, digestive problems, and a melancholic temperamental potentially linked to generations of inbreeding. But the women of these families bore a unique burden. For many, their entire identity was defined by how well they could breed, not just bear children, but bear legitimate, strategically useful children. Maria of Portugal is one such figure. Married to her first cousin, Philip II of Spain, she gave birth to Don Carlos, a prince whose mental instability would become infamous. Don Carlos was described as erratic, violent, and prone to dangerous outbursts, likely the product of a gene pool that had far too little diversity. Maria herself died in childbirth at age 17. Her short life is often reduced to a footnote in Philip II's story, but she is emblematic of the price noble women paid when dynasties refused to marry outside the family. And then there was Margaret of Austria, daughter of Charles II, and Maria Anna of Bavaria, another Habsburg union with a thick stack of mutual ancestors. Margaret, like many women in her family, suffered from severe facial deformities, likely the result of the Habsburg jaw-pronounced mandibular prognathism. That became a physical symbol of dynastic decay. Portraits of her often show her lower lip protruding dramatically, with a chin that almost folds into her chest. It's easy to overlook the person beneath the image. But Margaret wasn't just a painted face. She was a queen consort of Spain who bore 5 children, only 2 of whom survived infancy. She died young at 21 from complications related to one of her pregnancies. The church, interestingly, played both sides of the coin. On one hand, canon law prohibited marriages within for degrees of consanguinity roughly equal to third cousins. But these laws were often ignored by the very people the church most needed to keep happy: the nobility papal dispensations were handed out like parchment confetti. A nobleman could simply apply to the Pope for permission to marry a cousin or even a niece, so long as it promised political advantage. In fact, the more powerful the family, the more likely it was that the Pope would approve such unions. The Church's silence or sometimes its eager cooperation allowed incestuous marriages to flourish, especially among royal dynasties. Women like Eleanor of Portugal, who married her cousin Frederick III, Holy Roman Emperor, were often sent far from home to marry men they had never met. Eleanor's life is a mirror of this broader trend, one in which women became vessels for alliances, rarely granted autonomy. Her marriage, like so many others, was plagued with health complications, miscarriages, and mental strain. The further these royal families intermarried, the more often their children would be born still, die young, or live with profound cognitive or physical challenges. But beyond the physical toll, there was the psychological one. Imagine being told from childhood that your duty was to marry your cousin or your uncle, or your niece's son because it would serve the kingdom, that your fertility was not your own, that your health, happiness, and future were subordinate to the maintenance of a fragile family empire. For many women, the walls of their gilded palaces were just slightly more decorative cages. One wonders how much they understood about the risks. Did Margaret of Austria, or Maria of Portugal, or Juana la Loca ever connect their suffering to the closely shared bloodlines around them? Did they ever resent the family tree that circled inward like a tightening noose? Or was it simply what had always been done, an old truth sewn into the hem of every wedding gown, accepted without question? And yet, for all the royal pomp and ceremonial splendor, the most inbred women of medieval Europe were often left isolated, sickly, and forgotten. They were rarely allowed to rule in their own name, yet bore the heaviest cost of maintaining the dynasty. Their names, when remembered, are often remembered for their perceived madness, their stillborn children, or the unfortunate shape of their jaws. But how did this pattern go unbroken for so long? Why didn't anyone, pope, prince, or physician sound? The alarm as generation after generation suffer the same fate. The corridors of a medieval palace echo differently when you know the faces behind each door share the same ancestral blood. You walk with careful steps now, past richly painted ceilings and gilded staircases. You hear the whispers of tutors, drilling lineage into young girls, the gentle sighs of women writing letters home in languages not native to them, and the rustle of silk dresses woven in houses more focused on names than well-being. You're not merely in a castle, you're in a labyrinth of bloodlines, so entwined they eventually strangled themselves. In the last section, we met some of the most inbred women in medieval Europe. Now we step deeper into their lives, the dynastic pressure that built them, and the generational decisions that broke them. The Habsburgs are the most famous example, but they were far from alone. From the Iberian Peninsula to the northern reaches of the Holy Roman Empire, the practice of consanguineous marriage became embedded into the identity of nobility. What often began as a wartime political alliance soon spiraled into patterns, repeated across centuries. It wasn't merely tolerated, it was expected. The closer the blood, the less chance of outside influence, betrayal, or shifting loyalties. Take Isabella of Portugal, another pivotal figure in the 15th century Habsburg matrix. She was the daughter of Manuel I of Portugal and Maria of Aragon, who herself was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs. When Isabella married Charles V, her first cousin, it represented not only a unification of Spain and Portugal, but also another spin of the genetic roulette wheel. Their son was Philip II of Spain, the same man who later married his first cousin once removed, Anna of Austria. These marriages weren't accidental missteps, they were conscious repetitions of a family strategy. By the 16th century, the pattern had become alarmingly visible in the offspring. Royal children suffered not only physical deformities, such as mandibular prognathism, the infamous Habsburg jaw, but also signs of neurological and mental health decline. Charles II of Spain, often regarded as the most severely afflicted, was a direct product of repeated inbreeding. His parents were uncle and niece. He could barely speak, drooled constantly, and was unable to walk without assistance, despite being king of one of Europe's most powerful empires. Charles was so intellectually and physically impaired that he couldn't govern. His autopsy would later reveal he had only one testicle, was incapable of producing heirs, and his skull had not fully closed at age 38. But behind Charles II's medical horrors is the story of the women who birthed, raised, and cared for him, namely Mariana of Austria, his mother. Mariana was herself the daughter of a Habsburg double marriage. Her father was Emperor Ferdinand III, and her mother was Maria Anna of Spain. So Mariana married her uncle, Philip IV of Spain, and bore Charles as a result of one of the most extreme unions in European history. Mariana's life wasn't defined solely by her marriage. After Philip IV's death, she ruled as regent for her disabled son for over a decade. She was tasked with maintaining political alliances, fending off both internal court plots and external threats, all while being blamed often harshly for her son's infirmities. Whispered judgments circulated among ambassadors and noble courtiers that Mariana's tainted womb had bred weakness, that her Austrian pride made her blind to science and progress. Yet, could any woman in her position have done differently? Could she have refused the marriage, spoken against the tradition, or protected her child from the weight of history pressing down on his chest like a slab of stone? Probably not. Women, like Mariana, lived lives bound by birthright and politics, not agency. Even when they held crowns or regency titles, their choices were shaped and often strangled by the expectations of lineage. If a child was born malformed, the blame fell on the mother. If he died young, the court whispered of her curses. If he was sterile or insane, as Charles II likely was, it was seen as a reflection of her moral failing, not a warning sign to stop. Mary and Ken. The structure of inheritance laws further cemented this cycle. Primogeniture, the system by which the eldest son inherited everything, meant that the need to ensure legitimacy and control over succession was paramount. Marrying a foreign noble, even a relatively neutral one, posed too much risk. What if she brought divided loyalties, or worse, independent children who might challenge succession norms? Better, the thinking went to marry someone safe, someone within the family, someone whose loyalty could be counted not just through treaties, but blood. But this wasn't just a Western European problem. In the Byzantine Empire, intermarriage within dynasties had long been a feature of aristocratic politics. The Komnenos, Doukas, and Palaiologos families engaged in consanguineous marriages for generations. One empress, Theodora Doukaina, married her first cousin, and her descendants continued the trend until the empire's waning years. In Egypt's Fatimid Caliphate, and even earlier among the Ptolemies of ancient times, sibling marriages were not only common, they were celebrated as divine or noble. What makes the medieval European example different is the veneer of Christianity that both prohibited and excused it. The same church that forbade marriages between close kin also repeatedly granted exceptions for nobility. Popes signed off on cousin marriages because they understood that if they didn't, the monarchs might simply ignore the rule or worse, fund someone else's bishop. Canon law was always open to negotiation, especially when royal favors or territories were at stake. Yet it's the women who paid the cost. Eleanor of Austria, Catherine of Austria, Margaret Theresa of Spain, each of them bore the physical and emotional burden of this system. Margaret Theresa, the child bride famously painted by Velázquez in Las Meninas, married her uncle Leopold I. She was 15 at the time. She would give birth to 4 children, only one of whom lived past infancy. Her face, wide-eyed and pale, the portrait conceals a short life filled with ceremonial obligations and reproductive demands. She died at age 1. So much of this history exists in paintings and treaties. But what of the morning sickness, the miscarriages, the prayers whispered into the stone altars of private chapels? When a child was born still, what of the letters to mothers and sisters, long burned or lost, where women like Margaret or Maria poured out their exhaustion and grief? They are absent from the historical record, not because they didn't exist, but because they were not considered worthy of recording. Perhaps the saddest irony is that the very system designed to preserve power ultimately weakened it. Dynasties like the Habsburgs collapsed in part due to the health crises caused by inbreeding. The blue blood they were so proud of became their downfall and internal rot that no amount of papal approval or royal marriage ceremony could prevent. And yet, it persisted. Why did families continue to marry cousins and uncles even after the evidence of decline became undeniable? Was it arrogance, desperation, or simply inertia, a historical trap too deeply dug to climb out of? You find yourself now in a darkened chapel where incense burns slowly, curling into the cold air like the fading memory of a dynasty. A royal tomb lies before you, carved in alabaster, its inscription worn with time. The woman within was once queen, or duchess, or empress, but here, she is simply dust and a name. The walls echo with the same refrain that haunted the women of her line. You were born to preserve the crown even if it destroyed you. The Habsburg dynasty did not collapse in a single dramatic fall, like a house eaten slowly by termites. Its grandeur eroded from within. By the 18th century, after generations of marrying relatives, the family was beset not by rebellion or war but by sterility, mental illness, and physical decline. Charles II of Spain, whose pitiful reign we touched on earlier, left no heir. His death in 1700 triggered the War of the Spanish Succession and marked the end of the Spanish Habsburgs. The dynasty had, quite literally, bred itself into extinction. But let's return, for a moment, to the women behind that extinction. Consider Maria Anna of Austria, both niece and wife to her uncle Ferdinand III. She was intelligent, reportedly pious, and intensely devoted to her children. She gave birth to Leopold I, the future Holy Roman Emperor. And when you follow her line downward, you find Margaret Theresa, her granddaughter, who married her uncle, Leopold himself. Margaret died young, her only surviving child, dying in his youth. Again, the dynasty ate its own future. The deeper tragedy is how little voice these women had in the shaping of their lives. They were pawns in a deeply conservative and patriarchal system where blood was destiny, and deviation from tradition was dangerous. It's tempting to think of them as powerless victims, and many were, but some wielded influence in the spaces allowed to them. Mariana of Austria, Juana of Castile, Catherine of Austria, these women ruled, regented, negotiated. But even their acts of power were framed by their marriages and fertility. They could be queens, but only if they gave birth to kings, and their physical bodies became symbols of lineage. A broad forehead was read as a sign of noble blood. A prominent chin marked good stock. But over time, the symbolism became grotesque. The infamous Habsburg jaw, formerly known as mandibular prognathism, was so severe in Charles II that he couldn't chew solid food. His tongue was too large for his mouth, his speech was slurred, his spine was curved. He was bald by 30, toothless soon after. He was buried with the pomp due a monarch, but his autopsy was damning. His heart was the size of a peppercorn. The doctors wrote he was not the product of a single cousin marriage. He was the result of 16 generations of selective inbreeding. And again, behind that story is the woman who bore him, Mariana of Austria. What did she think as her son stumbled through state business, barely coherent? Did she mourn for him for the weight he carried? Did she blame herself, as society surely did? Or did she, perhaps, understand in a way no one else could that Charles II was not her failure, but her inheritance? The real horror of medieval inbreeding lies not in physical deformity alone, but in the systemic denial of alternatives. Girls as young as 12 were sent across mountains and oceans to marry their cousins, uncles, and sometimes even nephews. The language of their marriages was always couched in duty, never desire. These women rarely wrote memoirs. When they did, they spoke in guarded tones. One senses that much of their suffering was swallowed silently, like bad medicine taken on an empty stomach. In the courts and chapels of Europe, portraits of these women still hang. Velvet gowns, pale skin, wide skirts. They stare down at you from gilded frames, chin thrust forward, eyes tired. They are often remembered for their marriages and deaths, not their personalities. They appear delicate, but they were not weak. They were survivors of childbirth, court intrigue, miscarriages, and the relentless demands of dynastic survival. Some, like Juana La Loca, are still labeled mad, though modern historians suspect she may have simply grieved deeply or been politically inconvenient. Others, like Margaret of Austria, were celebrated in their time, but forgotten in ours. Their personal lives were obscured by politics. Their pain became state secrets. One final figure to remember is Maria Theresa of Austria, who came near the end of this inbred art. She ruled as the only female sovereign of the Habsburg dominions, though her marriage to Francis Stephen was not as genetically risky as earlier unions. Her bloodline carried the legacy of centuries of internal marriages. She was both a powerful ruler and the symbol of a decaying line. Of her 16 children, some inherited her strength, others bore the signs of fragility. After her reign, the Habsburgs would slowly unravel into ceremonial remnants. The Austrian branch limped into the 20th century, producing Franz Ferdinand the Archduke, whose assassination in 1914 sparked the First World War. But by then, the power of the dynasty was more tradition than reality. The world had changed. Empires no longer rested on cousin marriages or papal dispensations. And yet, the echoes remain. And old palaces turned museums, and genealogical charts with far too many loops, and genetic studies warning against the dangers of closed breeding pools, and royal families still trying to manage tradition without falling into the traps of their past. The most inbred women of medieval Europe weren't anomalies. They were the backbone of a system designed to preserve power through closeness, and in that closeness, it bred weakness. Their names may not be as famous as their husbands or sons, but their bodies, broken, burdened, and buried, tell the story more clearly than any scroll. And still, one wonders if a young archduchess, standing in a cold corridor of a castle in 1580, had whispered to her handmaid, "Why must I marry my cousin? What if I don't want to?" What would the answer have been? And more hauntingly, what might have changed if someone had listened? Temples of dreams and beds of stone, you awaken on a smooth, woven mat laid atop cool stone. The air smells of crushed myrrh and burning olive oil. Somewhere nearby, water trickles slow, deliberate like a breath. You are inside an Egyptian home more than 3,000 years ago. The world outside is quiet, but not asleep. In the distance, priests chant at a nearby temple. A scribe in a dim alcove writes down the dreams of a troubled nobleman. Here, in ancient Egypt, nightfall is not a break from the world, it is its own domain, a sacred one. Before electricity, before clocks, before the modern concept of 8 hours of sleep, ancient cultures developed their own practices, quietly elaborate systems for courting sleep, not merely as a health need, but as a ritual, often deeply spiritual and communal. And for many, sleep was not just rest, but a liminal experience, a visit to another world, a brush with the divine, or a confrontation with spirits. The rituals surrounding it reflect these beliefs. In ancient Egypt, sleep was intertwined with magic and medicine. Egyptian texts refer to sleep as a vulnerable state where the soul could leave the body and roam. Amulets were worn to prevent nightmares. People slept with protective charms beneath their heads, particularly scarabs or figures of bees. The squat, lion-faced god of sleep, childbirth, and warding off evil spirits. The Book of Dreams, a collection found among papyri dating back to the New Kingdom, categorized dreams by whether they were auspicious, ominous, or divine. For the elite, dream interpretation was a serious business. A troubling dream might warrant a visit to a temple priest, who specialized in dream incubation ritual sleep, designed to invite a god to visit one's dreams and offer guidance. This practice wasn't exclusive to Egypt. The Greeks developed similar rituals centuries later. Most famously at the temples of Asclepius, the god of healing. Patients suffering from ailments would travel long distances to these sanctuaries. After ritual purification, they would spend the night in a designated abaton, a darkened, sacred room where sleep was induced through prayer, fasting, and sometimes herbal concoctions. The belief was that Asclepius or his emissaries would appear in the dream state and either offer a cure or directly heal the afflicted sleeper. Upon waking, patients often recounted their visions to temple scribes, who recorded these dreams as medical case studies, blending science and mysticism in a way unique to the ancient mind. But these were not soft, plush environments. Beds, as we think of them today, barely existed. In Egypt, a bed might be a low wooden frame with woven reeds or cords and, in some cases, a headdress made of carved stone or ivory, shaped like a crescent that cradled the neck while lifting the head. The idea was not to provide luxury, but to promote bodily alignment and deter evil spirits from entering through the ears during slumber. The idea of sleeping with the head elevated also had medical logic. Egyptian physicians believed that bodily fluids moved through the body in ways that could be manipulated by posture. But again, the spiritual concern loomed larger. Dreams were vulnerable moments when the soul could wander, and the open ear was seen as an invitation to spirits sleeping upright or with ears partially shielded. Became part of a larger ritual of nighttime protection. In Mesopotamia, where clay tablets were scratched with meticulous care, sleep was understood both as divine gift and mortal danger. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature, is peppered with references to dreams and rest. In one episode, Gilgamesh is challenged to stay awake for 7 days. To prove his worth, he fails. Like all men must, sleep, here, is a divine force stronger than kings. And dreams, according to Mesopotamian dream books, could be read for prophecy, healing, or warnings. These dream texts, copied and preserved over generations, even categorized symbols. For instance, dreaming of a lion might mean power was coming, while dreaming of flood waters meant personal danger. Across the ancient Near East, sleep was often communal. Families and servants might share one space. Silence was not a given. Nights were full of gentle movement, of grinding grain for the morning meal, of children crying, of prayers whispered into the shadows. Rituals before bed might include oiling the body, reciting prayers, or burning incense to please domestic gods, and every action, however small, was part of a larger system meant to safeguard the soul during its nightly departure. The Chinese approach to sleep during the early dynastic periods blended Confucian order with Taoist metaphysics. Sleep and wakefulness were considered necessary counterparts in the balance of yin and yang. Nighttime rituals often involved herbal teas brewed with lotus, jujube, or chrysanthemum to calm the body's fire. In Taoist thought, the spirit could travel during dreams, sometimes visiting ancestors or receiving instruction from sages. Homes were arranged to support healthy sleep, beds placed away from drafts, doors oriented with regard to the cosmic flows of qi. Even how one lay on the right side, for instance, could influence dreams or digestion. Some elite households employed sleep specialists or dream interpreters as part of their household staff. But not all ancient sleep was mystical. Some of it was deeply practical. In ancient Greece and Rome, biphasic sleeping into chunks was common. People often retired early, slept for a few hours, then rose around midnight to perform quiet tasks, tending lamps, praying, even writing or making love. This first sleep and second sleep pattern wasn't seen as insomnia, but natural. The pause in between was considered a reflective, sometimes social time. Even in the shadowed villas of Rome, one might find scholars scribbling notes by lamplight while others murmur poetry, waiting for the second sleep to return. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder recommended sleeping with one's head facing north for best results. Others argued for south. Physicians gave contradictory advice. Some favored soft beds to encourage fertility. Others hard slabs to discipline the body. Emperor Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, noted the strangeness of waking how life resumes as if the night hadn't happened. It reveals something deeply Roman, a respect for routine, a desire to study even something as elusive as sleep. And everywhere, people feared what might come in the dark. In Babylon, amulets were strung on children's necks to protect them from malevolent night spirits thought to strangle sleepers. In Egypt, pregnant women kept protective figures near their beds to ward off miscarriages. In Greece, those who experienced recurring nightmares might sleep at temple sites, hoping divine dreams would overwrite their fearful ones. Even in ancient India, Vedic texts describe sleep nidra as one of the 5 bodily needs, alongside hunger and excretion. But nidra also had a divine aspect. Goddess Nidra was invoked in poems, sometimes feared for her power to bring forgetfulness. Ayurvedic physicians treated sleep disorders with dietary changes, mantras, and oil massages. From stone pillows to sacred incense, from dream diaries scratched onto clay to midnight ceremonies beneath temple stars. Sleep in the ancient world was never simply sleep. It was a dialogue with unseen forces, a ritual, a risk. But here's the question no scroll ever fully answered. Did these ancient rituals work? Did they offer comfort or only control? Were people truly more rested or simply more watchful of the world between dusk and dawn? You stand at the threshold of twilight and a dozen different worlds at once, each unfurling like a parchment map under your fingertips. Out in the open courtyards of the pink light fades, and the first lamp wicks sputter to life. Across the sea in a Greek polis, the agora empties while priests sprinkle wine onto marble altars, petitioning hypnotists to wrap the city in a gentle hush. Farther east, in a walled Chinese compound, a scholar instructs servants to stoke the king, a brick bed stove so that the bricks, hidden beneath thick quilts, will radiate warmth through the bitter night. Moment by moment, every culture lowers its voice, yet no two people prepare for sleep in exactly the same way. Point 1. Beds, mattresses, and headrests. The furniture of restart with what your body touches, not feathers and springs, but fibers and stone, wood and wool. Mesopotamia offered little beyond woven reed mats spread directly on hardened mud floors. Wealthier homes added low wooden frames strung with leather or cord. A patterned blanket, often goat wool, made the difference between shivering and comfort. Egyptian households prized headrests carved from sycamore, ebony, or alabaster. Lift your neck onto one, and you discover it is cooler than linen and high enough that scorpions and beetles rarely reach your face. The ark cradles your skull while keeping the ear clear of sand, gossip, and so believers swarm malevolent spirits that whispered sickness through open ear canals. Classical Greece and Rome developed the lectus, a long, couch-like bed whose rope webbing sagged unless tightened daily with a wooden key. A mattress stuffed with straw or dry rushes softened the ropes. Wealthy Romans replaced straw with wool or imported goose down. But even emperors kept a cedar board beneath to discourage vermin and mold. Han Dynasty China paired wood frames with thick straw pallets and, in colder regions, the cane. Imagine lying atop a brick platform under a quilt while a flue carries residual kitchen heat underneath, warming the slab all night. It is practical, yes, but the gentle whoosh of hot air also lulls you like a muted drumbeat struck beneath the floorboards. Where you place the bed matters, too. Manuscripts from the Hippocratic corpus warn not to sleep where stagnant air collects, lest watery humors settle in the lungs. The Chinese rites of Zhou recommends aligning the head toward the east, so the dreams follow the sun's rejuvenating path. In Rome, Pliny urges north-facing beds. Indian Vastu Shastra prefers south, rarely do recommendations agree revealing that certainty about sleep was as cultural as cuisine. 2. Night watchers, guardians, and domestic gods as darkness thickens. You sense it, a tremor of collective unease that universal night brings. To overcome it, ancient households ring themselves with invisible sentries. Egypt, a clay figurine of bees, dwarfish and lenine, stands on the bedside table. His wide-set eyes and protruding tongue frighten demons more effectively than any soldier. Parents sing lullabies that double as defensive spells. Bees is at the door, no nightmare can pass. Babylonia, tiny bronze lamasuing bowls with human heads flank thresholds. Cuneiform tablets list incantations against all spirits, instructing you to whisper the demon's name aloud, then spit 3 times before sleep. Greece, above your door lintel hangs a sprig of garlic twisted with red wool. Part folk cure, part homage to Hecate, guardian of liminal spaces. If bad dreams persist, you journey to an Asclepian and lie in the Abaddon. Priests, listening from antechambers, scrawl each dream onto lead sheets and nail them to pillars as both medical record and public offering. Rome, household shrines to the lairs glow with oil lamps. At each dusk meal, the paterfamilias sprinkles wine and grain onto the hearth so ancestral spirits will patrol the house perimeter. The act is communal, rhythmic, taken for granted, yet every family member eases into sleep believing ancestors walk the corridors. And silent relay, China, paper talismans inked by Taoist adepts hang above bed curtains, stamped with zigzag lightning. Characters meant to dazzle wandering ghosts. If an infant cries in the second watch of night, a nurse flips the baby's pillow sideways. A folk saying claims this turns the dream's page and resets the spirit's journey. Protection. Rituals rarely require full belief. Repetition alone is soothing. The slow circular motion of tying a charm. The scent of garlic or dripping myrrh. The warm flicker of a lamp each detail coaxes nerves to settle, convincing body and mind that guardians stand ready. 3. Pharmacopoeia. Of drowsiness mull the air. Bitter poppy resin steeped in goat's milk and a dim Egyptian pantry. A Babylonian mother blotting mandrake paste onto her child's temples. A Greek physician mixing kike and barley gruel with a dash of fermented honey. To quiet an anxious heart. Across cultures, sedatives rose from shared observation. Certain plants hushed the mind. Opium poppy paper for somniferum grew along Nile banks and Aegean hillsides. Pharaonic doctors prescribed poppy-infused beer for night wandering of the soul. Mandrake root, shaped like a human figure, carried mythic weight. Dioscoride suggests brewing the shavings in wine. Too much brings oblivion. A fine line from sleep to death. Lotus seeds in China, valerian in Rome. Henbane in Germany. Each local medicine cabinet reveals the same priority, coaxing rest safely. Yet many healers worry that heavily drugged sleep invited dreamless oblivion, cutting the thread by which gods delivered warnings. So dosage was cautious, sometimes paired with aromatics burning juniper, cedar, or frankincense thought to purify dream corridors rather than blockage. For his segmented nights and midnight our sire eyelids first close soon after dusk. This is the first sleep lasting 3 to 4 hours. In a mud brick house in Thebes or a villa outside Pompeii, people wake naturally around midnight. Some rise to check the livestock or stoke embers. Others kneel in prayer. Roman poet Ovid writes love letters scheduled for this hush, calling it Horace silently the hour of hush. Evidence appears in Chinese court diaries. 2. Emperor Jing of Han issues edicts in the time between sleeps when thoughts feel sharpened, purified by the stillness. Medical writers believe primo somnia, deep first sleep, cured illness. The interval that followed allowed digestion and devotion. Secundo somnia, a lighter second stretch, ushered dawn gently. Only later, with artificial lighting, would humanity push bedtime later and merge the two blocks into one continuous stretch. 5. Dream interpretation, record, and prescription. What happens while the body lies inert fascinated the ancient mind. You kneel beside a Syrian merchant copying symbols into wax tablets. A white ox means prosperity. A collapsing roof means family strife. In Egypt's village of Deir el-Medina, a worker paints his night vision on a limestone ostracon, gifting it to a priest for diagnosis. In Greece, Artemidorus compiles his 5-volume Wonder Critica, cross-referencing social status with dream omens because a snake in a king's dream forecasts something different than a snake in a fisherman's. Chinese Zhou-era bureaucrats keep Zhaidu dream registers in bamboo slips, summarizing officials' nightly visions, allowing emperors to gauge moral climate inside their court. A nightmare, if repeated, might trigger ritual fasts or temple offerings. Not unlike a modern prescription, except the medicine is ceremony itself. 6. Sleeplessness and its curious in every era. Someone fails to drift off. Babylonian exorcists blame a jealous ghost. Roman doctors blame an excess of black bile. Indian Charaka Samhita blames an imbalance of vata wind in the nerves. Treatments vary but share a cadence of patience. Dietary adjustments: warm goat milk with honey in Egypt, mashed dates in Gyan Vedic villages. Soft millet gruel drizzled with sesame oil in China. Bathing: the Greeks slip into tepid pools scented with marjoram. The Romans into hypocaust heated caldaria. Pores open, muscles slacken. Reading aloud in a Judean household. Psalms are recited until the anxious mind takes refuge in rhythm. In a Celtic broch, epic tales unwind until the listener drifts into the story's twilight. Listening posts: certain Chinese courtyards host night drummers who strike wooden clappers at set hours. The predictable tock-tock-tock reassures residents that the city watch is awake, so they do not have to be when these remedies fail. Desperation breeds heavier measures, stronger opiates, longer temple residencies. Appeal to oracles: occasionally, an inscription surfaces where a sleepless sufferer vows to sacrifice a bull if given one. Uninterrupted night of rest, a poignant glimpse of how tormenting chronic insomnia could feel in a world that already labored daily against famine, plague, and war. 7. Community, privacy, and the myth of quiet. Step into a modest Roman insula apartment. Families cook, argue, and snore within paper-thin partition walls. Privacy is rare, sound carries mercilessly, yet people adapt, sleeping in staggered shifts, using woven screens, singing lullabies loud enough to mask neighbors' coughs. In rural Anatolia, shepherds bundle together with their flocks, believing animal warmth deters evil as much as cold. In Nile Delta fishing villages, nets double as hammocks. The constant slap of water becomes a lullaby. Contrast that with an elite Greek dream temple, where individuals sleep alone on cushioned pelts in near total darkness. Silence there is curated, almost oppressive. The aspirant's heartbeat becomes thunder in his ears. When a god appears in imagined form or subtle sensation, the chamber itself seems to breathe. Upon waking, the solitary dreamer re-enters communal daylight, convinced he has touched divinity. Though he spoke to no one all night, toward morning the ritual of waking down breaks differently in each land. Egyptians greet Ra with hymns, turning their faces east so the soul returns through the eyes. Riding light, Romans scrub with cold water, believing shock invigorates a sluggish spirit. In Han China, a servant unrolls bamboo blinds while musicians strike a soft gong, 5 measured beats to harmonize household qi. Yet across cultures, a common thread emerges: waking is ritual, not rupture. You re-enter the world intentionally, as though pulling yourself from a pull. Night, with its dreams and hazards, recedes but slowly, courteously, leaving just enough memory to shape the coming day. So many civilizations, so many rites, each one claiming to master the dark, though none could halt nightmares entirely. Was comfort found in these layers of practice, or simply distraction? An illusion of control draped over something untamable. And if a fragment of those ancient rituals lingers in your own bedtime habits, an open window for fresh air, a soft prayer, A favorite orientation of the pillow? Do you perpetuate wisdom, or merely echoes of forgotten fears? Night settles around you once more, but now it carries the weight of centuries. You've moved beyond the dream chambers and temple courtyards of Egypt, Babylon, Greece, and China. You've stepped through the smoke of burned herbs, heard the soft drip of oil lamps in darkened halls, and listened to the whispered fears of those who believe sleep to be a journey through the land of spirits. And as you return to this final passage, you begin to notice something uncanny: faint reflections of ancient sleep rituals, still lingering in your modern world, disguised, diluted, but persistent. Take, for example, the strange modern habit of placing a glass of water by the bedside in homes across continents. It's a nearly unconscious gesture of comfort or routine. Yet in ancient Mesopotamia, water vessels were kept close to catch evil spirits that might otherwise enter through the mouth or nose during sleep. A bowl of still water beside one's head was seen as a mirror for the soul, reflecting malice away and preserving rest. The action persists even if the belief has faded. When you draw the curtains shut, it's easy to forget that the practice of darkening a room before sleep has roots in ancient fear. In classical Rome, heavy woolen drapes weren't just for comfort, but protection from moonlight, which was thought to disturb one's humors, and from the curious eyes of wandering spirits. Darkness, paradoxically, was both feared and required. A room left to open was an invitation, one to closed risk, stagnation of the soul. And what of lullabies? Soft, repetitive sounds sung over infants today seem sweet, instinctive. But their origins are older, far older, descending from incantations used to bind nightmares, to keep death from the threshold. Babylonian mothers sang to ward off Lamashtu, a she-demon who preyed upon sleeping infants. Egyptian nursemaids offered chants to bees, begging him to make a child's soul heavy so it would not wander away in the night. Sleep was not guaranteed. It had to be invited, coaxed, and watched over with the precision of a priest tending a flame. Even the act of reading before bed, the modern wind-down ritual involving novels, screen-lit books, or news articles, echoes the ancient tradition of storytelling as a sleep aid. In early Vedic households, elders recited the Mahabharata or Ramayana to lull the mind into a sacred calm. In Greek homes, children heard the tales of Odysseus not just for moral instruction, but to surrender to a familiar rhythm. In China, Confucian fables were whispered beneath quilts warmed by firestones. Each story soothed the nervous system with the predictability of narrative, the way language slows the pulse and steadies thought. Not much has changed. The idea of setting intentions before sleep also holds ancient weight in modern self-help circles. People are encouraged to manifest their goals by thinking about them before bed. But millennia earlier, Greek dream temples guided patients to sleep by reciting prayers or visualizing healing. Egyptian priests suggested repeating a desire aloud before lying down, so it might be planted in the soul and tended by the gods overnight. Across dynasties, people believed that sleep was fertile ground ripe for planting questions, desires, fears, or requests for insight. It was not idle time. It was receptive time. Yet sleep was not equally given to all. In ancient cities, the poor often slept in shifts, curled near oven walls or beneath stairwells, waking often to unfamiliar sounds or pest infestations. In the shadowed corners of Athens or Jerusalem, you would find workers bundled tightly, their sleep lighter than others. The rituals of the rich, the dream consultations, the incense, the precise architecture of rest were luxuries. The farmer in a hut in the Indus Valley, the washerwoman along the Nile, the shepherd in Anatolia each found sleep where they could. Their rituals were simpler: a folded cloth, a murmured prayer, a rock warmed by fire. But still, even they feared the night as something that could carry away more than fatigue. It's easy, in a world filled with medical terminology and sleep studies, to think we've moved beyond this, that we've exchanged incantation for melatonin, ghost wards for white noise machines, but the shadows cast by ancient rituals stretch long across time. Modern hospitals may not have Asclepian chambers, but we still ask patients how they're sleeping. We still treat dreams as clues. We speak of sleep hygiene the way Romans spoke of nightly balance. We consult apps and graphs and smartwatches, replacing temple priests with algorithms, but the goal remains identical: rest, renewal, a sense of safety as consciousness dissolves. And there is something deeply human in the way we continue to mark our transition into sleep. We lower lights, we turn off the noise, we adjust the pillow just so each act, though minor, is its own kind of offering, its own ritual in a world that no longer believes in demons, but still fears what may come when we lose control. The ancients feared soul theft or divine judgment. Today we fear racing thoughts, memory loss, chronic insomnia, different names for the same unease. Yet sleep, even now, remains mysterious. No science has fully captured its essence. Dreams come and go with no warning. A scent, a sound, or a passing thought can steer the mind into landscapes unknown. Whether you believe in wandering spirits or just wayward neurons, the result is the same. For a third of our lives, we become someone else, somewhere else. And waking is always a return from an unseen voyage. So as you lie down tonight, in a bed perhaps softer than any your ancestors ever knew, you might still find yourself repeating their gestures without realizing it. The cool side of the pillow, the dimming of lights, a final word, a good night, a prayer, a question. And when your mind finally slips away into dreams, ask yourself, are you truly alone in your sleep? Or are you walking ancient paths once trodden by dreamers, pilgrims, and restless souls who too, long ago, feared the dark and found comfort in ritual? A city at the edge of the world, you are drifting not in sleep, but in water. A warm, sluggish current tugs at your feet as sunlight filters through shifting green. Below you, through a blur of silt and sea grass, lie the broken shapes of columns and doorways. Carved hieroglyphs peek from beneath layers of sediment. Bronze statues, long, blind, seem to stare up toward a surface they will never touch again. You are gliding above the ruins of a city that was once Egypt's gateway to the Mediterranean, the city the Greeks called Heracleon, and the Egyptians knew as Thonis. Now, it is only whispers and rubble beneath the sea. Before Alexandria, before Cleopatra's palace graced the northern coast, there was Heracleon. In the fading centuries before the Common Era, it was one of the most important port cities in all of Egypt, a place where ships from Greece, Phoenicia, and Rome gathered in noisy harbors to trade linen, grain, incense, and wine. To pass through, Heracleon was to be weighed, taxed, recorded, and cleansed. No foreigner entered the sacred Nile Delta without crossing its threshold. For generations, it stood proudly on the edge of land and sea, its temples rising like stone islands above brackish water. Heracleon's origins are as murky as the waters that now claim it. Some ancient writers believed it was founded during the reign of the mythical king Khonsu. Others placed it in the time of the 26th dynasty, around 600 BCE. What is known, because the silt-covered ruins tell us so, is that by the time of the late pharaonic period, it was thriving. Its streets were lined with statues of gods and kings, some weighing tons. Its buildings were raised atop foundations of mud brick and limestone. Its quays carved to receive ships laden with treasure and tribute. Here, near the temple of Amun-Gareb, pharaohs came to perform sacred rites. Offerings were made to secure Egypt's favor in international trade. Heracleon was more than a customs port, it was a place of divine diplomacy, where priests read the stars and interpreted dreams for sailors bound for distant lands. The goddess Neith was worshipped here, her shrines rich with votive offerings. And towering above the city's heart stood the great temple of Khonsu Heracles, where Egyptians and Greeks alike gave thanks for safe passage and strong winds. But Heracleon was not built on bedrock. It rose instead on clay-rich delta silt, dense, saturated, unstable. Over time, the city grew heavy. Stone temples, massive statues, walls, and roads all bore down on the earth. The waterlogged soil beneath could not carry the weight forever. Slowly, imperceptibly, the ground began to shift. Earthquakes rattled the coast. Tsunamis sent shock waves up the Nile's mouth. Parts of the city cracked and subsided. Canals overflowed. People rebuilt. But the sea had already begun its quiet conquest. One morning, perhaps in the 2nd century BCE, a section of the port simply vanished. A warehouse collapsed into the water. Pilings splintered. The next year, another district sank. People whispered of angry gods. The priests offered more incense. Sailors told of hearing temple bells ring beneath the waves. Eventually, only parts of Heraclean remained above the floodline, and then even those were gone. For nearly 2,000 years, the city existed only in fragmented texts, half-remembered stories from Herodotus, Australians, and Egyptian hymns. Scholars debated whether Heraclean was a myth or perhaps a Greek corruption of another city's name. Its fate, like its walls, lay buried, until, in 2000, marine archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team swept the waters off the Egyptian coast and found what no one expected: columns, statues, tablets, coins, and entire city beneath the sea. And the best preserved artifacts were not grand. They were ordinary. A loaf of bread still cradled in clay, ink pots, sandals, a comb. These fragments told the story of daily life, not just of temples and taxes. Heraclean, it seemed, had not died in a single cataclysm, but had quietly slipped away over generations. What must it have felt like to live in those final years? To watch the water inch higher every season? To feel tremors beneath your feet as stone cracks silently beneath the mud? Did family speak of leaving? Or were they to tide the sacred ground, to bound by tradition, to flee? When the markets flooded, did merchants simply move their stalls higher up the canal bank, muttering complaints but refusing to abandon what they knew? Some historians believe Heraclean's slow drowning was hidden by its bureaucratic function. So critical was its role as a port and temple that authorities refused to acknowledge the signs. Taxes were still collected, priests still performed rites, trade continued. But under it all, the clay softened, and so, day by day, year by year, the city was claimed not by disaster, but by indifference and delay. Now, beneath meters of seawater, its statues lean at odd angles in the murk. Their eyes, worn blank by salt, see nothing, but their placement tells a story. The way they cluster near former doorways, the way tablets lie toppled beside their pedestals. It's as if the city never quite fell. It simply laid itself down. But if Heraclean had once been the gate to Egypt, how could it disappear so completely from collective memory? Why was its name nearly forgotten? Why did Alexandria rise in its place so seamlessly, without so much as a whispered remembrance for the city that preceded it? Perhaps the answer lies not in catastrophe, but in continuity. The people of Heraclean did not all drown. They moved inland. Their gods were worshipped anew in other shrines. Their customs lived on in Alexandria's harbors and Coptic chants. Heraclean didn't die, it dissolved into Egypt's bloodstream. And yet, as you float now above its sunken streets, staring at the outline of a half-buried doorway, you can't help but wonder, was there a final day? A final ritual? A last priest lighting incense before the temple floor cracked and slid beneath the tide? What would it have felt like to be the last person who locked the door in Heraclean, knowing it might never open again? You are not standing among ruins, not yet. The year is somewhere between 400 and 200 BCE, and Heraclean is alive. The sun is already high, glinting off the dull green of the canals that cut through the city like veins. Water laps gently against the stone foundations of homes raised on plinths, just high enough to keep them dry at least. For now, the smell is a mix of brine, lotus blossom, goat dung, and seaweed left to dry in wicker baskets near the harbors. Around you, Heraclean hums not the chaos of a modern port, but the steady, purposeful sound of a city at work. You hear wooden wheels creaking as porters move amphorae filled with wine or oil. The slap of sandals against damp stone. A fisherman argues with a tax collector, gesturing with his net still dripping from the Nile. Up above, in the shade of a colonnaded temple, a scribe sharpens his reed pen and watches it all with faint. The centerist, Heraclean's layout feels less like a city and more like a hybrid part land, part water. Streets become canals without warning. Wooden walkways link stone buildings. Boats are not luxuries here. They're lifelines. Flat-bottomed vessels, piloted by men who have memorized every submerged hazard, dart back and forth across the channels, delivering everything from building supplies to temple offerings. The water isn't crystal clear. It's murky, tinged with algae and churned up silt. You cannot see the bottom, but you've learned not to need to. This city is a melting pot. Egyptian, yes, but thick with Greek influence. You hear merchants haggling in both languages, often within the same breath. Greek sailors from Crete lounge in the shade beside Egyptian priests. A statue of Amun-Ra stands in a courtyard next to one of Heracles, the Greek hero for whom the city is named in its foreign tongue. Religious syncretism is not just tolerated here, it's practiced. Greeks arriving in Heraclean would often perform rituals in both traditions, hedging their spiritual bets each evening. Temple officials pour sacred oils into the harbor's edge, a gesture meant to bless those arriving and departing by sea. The smell of frankincense and cedar drifts downwind, mixing with the harsher sense of fish, rope, and salt at the temple of Khonsu Heracles. Torchlight dances across the blackened walls where sailors come to offer silver coins, bronze weights, or small clay figurines. Many come to ask for safe passage. A few ask for forgiveness. Most simply want a favorable tide. The city has bureaucracy woven into its bones. Before you can sell grain, your cargo is registered. Before you dock, a clerk inspects your cargo seal. Before you pray, you wash your hands at a basin blessed by both sun and moon. Heraclean is Egypt's customs checkpoint, both physically and spiritually. That dual role, guardian of trade and faith, defines its rhythm. During daylight, it bustles with noise and labor. At dusk, it hushes into ritual. Even in the homes of common people, routine shapes everything. Morning begins early. Water is drawn from wells or brought in amphorae from upstream. Meals are simple: emmer bread, lentils, fish dried in salt, clay. Hearths line inner courtyards. Cooking smells waft out over the walls, mingling with the voices of children, the barking of dogs, the buzzing of flies. Women grind barley and gossip about neighbors. Men oil their arms with crushed herbs before setting out for the docks. Time is measured by sun and shadow, not clock or bell. Children learn to swim before they can read. It's a necessity. Every canal is a potential danger. A misplaced step means soaked clothing or worse. Wooden poles line major intersections to aid in balance. You can spot the newcomers by their bruised shins, and soggy sandals dot inside homes. Decorations vary depending on wealth. Richer households have painted walls earth-toned scenes of reeds and birds, of sacred symbols and geometric patterns. Most floors are compacted earth, swept clean with reed brushes. At night, people sleep on raised beds with linen sheets, though many doze on rooftops during the hotter months. The air is thick, humid, and still. To sleep indoors without airflow is to invite fever. At the city's periphery, things feel more precarious. Stone gives way to mud brick. Walkways narrow. Boats grow smaller and older. It is here, near the marsh edges, where you see the signs: water. Lines on walls that don't match last season's high tide. Cracks where the mud brick has buckled. Locals mutter that the city sinks more each year, but few act on it. Life goes on. Rent is cheaper here, and temple workers rarely venture this far out. No one speaks openly about leaving. Why would they? Heraclean is blessed. It has always been blessed. The gods are here. The sea provides. The silos remain full. Yes, sometimes the water creeps higher. Sometimes boats must be tied to new posts, steps rebuilt, walls reinforced. But the city is eternal. It must be, even as bricks flake and doorways warp. The belief remains unshaken. Priests say the tremors are natural. The gods are testing the people's faith. The cracks in the earth are symbolic calls for deeper devotion. Offerings increase. Rituals are repeated. More incense, more silver. But even temple walls are beginning to tilt. And still, life continues. Each new generation knows her clan slightly differently than the one before. Grandparents remember roads where there are now canals. Children grow up thinking that water at the doorstep is normal. People adapt. They always have. They build higher thresholds, raise furniture on stone feet, learn which alleyways remain dry in the rainy season. They whisper about the sinking, but only in half jokes. After all, cities don't vanish. Not really. Some nights, though, when the moon is high and the water still, the reflection of the temple columns ripples like a warning. Some swear they can hear creaking beneath the ground like doors opening underwater. Others say it's only the groan of boats or the wind against the marsh reeds. But there is a silence underneath the noise, a waiting, heavy hush like the sea is holding its breath. And somewhere in the heart of the temple district, where offerings pile up, and stone gods gaze sightlessly toward the coast, a crack splits the base of a foundation. It's small, harmless. It might not even be noticed, but it wasn't there last week. So how long does a city live after the first fracture? Is it years? Generations? Or only until the last person chooses to believe it won't matter? Night has bled into dawn. From a watchtower at the harbor mouth, you stare eastward over the delta, wondering why the horizon feels closer than it did yesterday. The air tastes brackish. Salt clings to the wicker of every fish basket and settles in silver dust on the scribe's wax. Tablets, somewhere behind you, beyond rows of torque-shaped papyrus stems. A priest completes the morning libation to consoracles, but his chant quavers when the tower beneath you shivers not violently, just enough that stone rasps against stone, as though a great animal has shifted in its sleep beneath the city. No alarms ring. No panic flight ensues. Hurricane is used to tremors. Still, you sense something has slipped out of alignment. Step onto a quay you walked yesterday and you find the paving blocks tilted like loose teeth. A porter splashes ankle deep through a puddle that refuses to drain back into the canal. He curses, shifts the amphora higher on his shoulder, and moves on because trade never stops. It is the season when Cypriot copper arrives by the shipload. Priests need their temple dues. Scribes need headcounts to satisfy Memphis, and merchants need signatures on clay seals before shadows shorten. Weeks pass. Fishmongers joke that the sea is trying to claim unpaid taxes. Stonecutters begin propping bronze statues at odd angles, so a passerby will not notice the plinth and pavement have parted company. Festivals proceed as though nothing has changed. Yet talk in the wine stalls turns to rumors. Fishermen swear their nets snag on new humps of masonry rising from the harbor bed. Pilots complain that familiar channels have choked so shallow there. Or blades strike silt. One dawn, a bleary dockmaster taps a sounding pole through water and hears not the usual hollow thud of mud, but a sudden empty clack, then a gulp as the pole plunges into unseen space. He pulls it out dripping, shakes his head, and files the incident on a shard of limestone that will never reach the archives. The earth wavers beneath Heraclean for years, a slow-motion undulation driven by shifting sand lenses hidden deep under the delta. No single quake topples colonnades. No tidal wave smashes barges against the quay. Instead, whole districts splay open a long hairline. Fractures. Buildings lean until the weight of roof tiles splits supporting beams, then slump theatrically into the canal. Walls dissolve in the slurry. The process is gentle enough that families gather belongings before floors tilt, yet swift enough that a returning sailor finds his favorite tavern vanish beneath milky water, where cattails already sprout. And then, as though by agreement, people leave. Not all at once, and not with lamentation. First go the itinerant traders who can shift their ledgers upriver to Nokratis. Next, priests of lesser shrines whose stipends dry up once pilgrim traffic drops. Finally, the households tied by lineage, an oath to the great temple of Amun-Garib. They stay longest, insisting that divine favor will wrest the city back from the sea. But tides ignore rhetoric. One spring equinox, floodwaters climb 3 steps higher than any previous inundation and remain for a fortnight. Records show no riot, no funeral pyre. They simply show a sudden scarcity of entries, fewer shipments logged, fewer sacrifices registered, fewer births recorded. Hurricane exhales, and its pulse gutters out. The last officials pack icons, codices, and the still shining temple silver onto barges and strike south for safer ground. A silt-choked channel closes behind them with a hiss. By the time Alexandria's lighthouse flickers to life a century later, nobody speaks of Thonis Heraclean except as cautionary metaphor, built on farm ground. Say the elders, or the river will teach you humility. For 2,000 years the city lies entombed beneath 16 feet of water and a quilt of delta mud. Storms blow grains of Sahara eastward, layering the drowned streets in osher dust. Now flood sloughs fresh, silt over the rooftops, sealing doorways so neatly that clay amphorae remain upright inside storerooms. Lids still tied with linen, wooden lintels decay and delays, but granite plinths stay stubborn, armored in barnacle husks. Fish swarm though porticos where tax officials once clacked abacuses. Sea urchins bloom in priestly basins that once held holy oils, ebony hairpins. Dropped in panic or haste, fossilize in anaerobic silt beside the pewter mirrors they once adorned. The city grows quiet, and quieter still, until even memory dissolves. Yet memory, like delta clay, never disperses completely. A Greek geographer in the 2nd century CE copies a sentence from an earlier text mentioning the vanished port of Heracles. A 10th century Arab mariner tells of a ring of stone rising from the sea west of Rashid that rings like bronze. When struck, medieval fishermen claim that at the lowest ebb they hear bells toll beneath the surf. Each sliver of lore is filed away in someone's chronicle, footnoted, miscopied, half disbelieved but not erased. The industrial age arrives, and with its steamships that swim across Heraclean's flooded roof without suspecting muzzled statues yawn beneath their keels. In 1933, a British raft pilot surveying for Royal Navy charts reports shadowy rectangular shapes in shallow water 8 kilometers off Abu Qir Bay. His note is archived, eclipsed by war, and forgotten. Not until the late 20th century do archaeologists armed with magnetometers and side-scan sonar begin to stitch those ghost reports together. They log a faint magnetic anomaly shaped like twin colonnades, an acoustic image of right angles to regular for geology, a scatter of bronze echoes. Each data point teases, but budgeting runs dry, and Egypt's bureaucracies shift priorities. Then, in 2000, marine archaeologist Frank Gaudio steers a barge bristling with electronics over coordinates long, rumored by souvenir dealers and fishermen. Survey lines map the seabed like a loom weaving cloth. At first the prints look like static, but patiently, form emerges, rows of blocks etched by tide. A causeway flanked by oblong voids, outlines of barges long petrified into negative space. Divers descend through tea-green murk and land on pavement, so intact that sand ripples across its grout lines like wind across dunes. A hand sweeps mud from carved lotus petals. A 20-foot red granite statue of the god Happy tilts into view. Its surface slick with marine patina, yet its facial lines crisp. As if the sculptor paused only yesterday, excavation begins. Teams move with the delicacy of librarians handling a crumbling codex. They lasers cubic meters of silt, bulk bagging deposits for sieving on deck because each pinch of sediment holds coins, scarabs, wooden styluses, corroded hinges, hair clasps, glass amulets. They lift stelae inscribed in hieroglyphs and Greek, proclaiming decrees of Pharaoh Nectaneboi. They find gold weight stamped with the eye of Horus, lead anchors. Bronze oil lamps shaped like bees, terracotta figurines of child gods, ceremonial ladles, a soldier's worn sandal with the crosshatch of reed decking still imprinted in its sole. What astonishes the researchers most is ordinariness. Grand statues garner headlines, but it is the scrap of linen fused to a copper needle that redraws scholarship. Evidence of textile workshops on site rather than imports from upriver. A jar still half filled with garum confirms Greek culinary trade. A docket tablet records barley taxes, exacted in a year previously blank in the dynastic annals. Each mundane artifact whispers a correction, a nuance, a footnote, until Heraclean shifts from rumor to data-rich settlement in the story of Egypt's late period. Technology adds layers. High-resolution photogrammetry knits thousands of images into virtual streets, revealing building alignments that track star risings. Isotope analysis of oyster shells shows how salinity changed decade by decade, implicating not just tectonics but gradual sea level rise. Micro-CT scans of coins expose metal mixtures that chart economic stress preceding Alexander's conquest. Through these tools, the drowned city speaks a language of statistics and stratigraphy impossible for ancient chroniclers to foresee. But artifacts only articulate half the tale. The other half is the emotional hum between objects, the tiny ivory doll clasped in a child's fist. When mud burst through a doorway, the inkwell upended mid-ledger. The wooden loaf mold still dusted with chaff, suggesting a baker fled before. Dawn's proofing and storage trays on deck. These relics dry under fans, the salt weeping out in crystalline lace, while scholars annotate catalog numbers. Visitors peer through lab glass at things no sunlight had touched for millennia, and murmur about the uncanny freshness of loss. Heraclean becomes exhibit, headline, documentary voiceover. Yet even as stadia of media spotlight swirl, the site itself remains half-mapped. Vast quarters of the city still hide beneath untouched silt. Archaeologists calculate that at current funding rates, complete excavation could span a century. They debate whether to raise more statues or leave them sealed for future researchers, armed with yet unimagined methods. Meanwhile, currents sculpt fresh sand tongues, burying trenches dug only seasons before. Nothing is static. The water that preserved Heraclean now threatens to abrade it. Faster than scientists can rescue it. Standing on the dive platform at sunset. A conservator studies the horizon where violet haze blurs sea into sky and wonders whether another Heraclean is already forming in anonymity elsewhere, a city oblivious to slow tectonic sag, its citizens comforted by familiar rituals, convinced that incremental change poses no existential threat. Perhaps on the low-lying islands of the Sundarbans, or the lagoons edging Venice, or the delta villages of the Mekong, thresholds are rising stone by stone, door by door, just as they once did here. The scale is different, the technology is advanced, but the habit of postponement patched the wall, raised the step. Trust in next season's fortune remains stubbornly human. Heraclean's rediscovery has jolted historians into new humility. That entire urban networks with archives, temples, and tax offices can vanish, misfiled by memory, and that their return is not guaranteed. It forces a reckoning with the fragility of permanence. Granite obelisks survive, but context erodes. Names persist in papyrus marginalia, but the streets they label smear into formless delta. Knowledge disperses like silt in brackish tide pools, then resurfaces sparkling yet incomplete in a diver's lamp beam. Walk once more above the ruins in imagination, watching seagrass undulate around toppled columns. Picture the baker's alley, the scribe's key, the fumbling porters, the priests whose chant quavered at dawn. They are gone, but not erased. Suspended as all histories are between oblivion and recall. Their city rests in patient equilibrium with the water that betrayed it, yielding broken amphory to scholarship in exchange for the hush of unbroken sleep. And as you lean over the gunwale, waves slapping quietly in the dusk, another thought drifts up from the dark. If whole cities can slide beneath notice for 2,000 years, What chapters of our own world are already sinking slowly, incrementally, while we mistake the tremor for mere inconvenience? Toothaches in the time before anesthesia of pain starts slowly. Just a dull throb beneath the gum line. You chew on one side. You wince when drinking cold water. Then it spreads. You wake with a swollen face. The ache pulsing in time with your heartbeat. You have a toothache, and it is 2,000 years before the discovery of antibiotics. Now imagine you are in ancient Mesopotamia. The year is perhaps 1200 BCE, and you're a scribe who can no longer concentrate because your jaw aches constantly. There are no dentists, not as you would think of them, but there are ASU healers trained in physical treatments and Ashipu, spiritual healers who deal with demons. You will likely see both. Your condition will be explained through a mixture of observation and belief. One popular theory recorded in cuneiform on clay tablets is that a toothworm has bored into your molar, feeding on your blood and nerves. The only way to dislodge it is ritual. An Ashipu offers a protective incantation while burning incense. You are told to chew on a clove of garlic mixed with beer and to bite down on a heated bronze wire. The pain briefly spikes, then dulls. The worm, they say, has retreated. You hope they're right. The idea of toothworms appears in Babylonian and Sumerian texts, and the belief spreads across the ancient world. People describe worms with little heads and greedy mouths, hiding in teeth. It is a comforting explanation, something to blame beyond the rotting itself. In a world without germ theory, the decay of the body needs to be personified. Your pain is not abstract. It is the work of a thing, and things can be cast out. Now shift to Egypt around 1500 BCE, the Nile. Floods have receded. You're a builder working on a tomb near Thebes. The air is dry, the bread is coarse, and your diet includes lots of sand from grinding stones used to mill grain. You chip a tooth, and over time, it rots. You are far from the court physicians, but in nearby villages, there are local healers. Some remedies are surprisingly advanced. Honey is used as an antiseptic. A poultice of dates and natron is packed against the gum. There are even hints that Egypt may have pioneered some of the world's first dental prosthetics. Archaeologists have found mummies with teeth wired into place using gold wire, not for function, likely, but for appearance in the afterlife. Still, it suggests that someone understood the idea of artificial dental structure, at least symbolically. Even the great physician Imhotep, centuries earlier, had written about inflammation and infections of the mouth. Egyptian medical papyri like the Ebers Papyrus list dozens of recipes for treating tooth gnawing and gum disease. Some of the pastes contained cumin, malahite, or crushed sycamore. The problem was widespread. Hard bread and low hygiene made oral decay common. Remedies were limited, but the documentation, so much of it methodical, shows a civilization trying to understand and soothe daily suffering in whatever way it could. Now move east to the Indus Valley or early Vedic India. Here, too, teeth are seen as sacred instruments of speech and eating, gifts from divine order. Ayurveda, the ancient Indian system of medicine, included detailed practices for oral hygiene. You are taught to chew on neem sticks to clean your teeth and freshen your breath. The bitterness, it turns out, has antimicrobial properties. Warm oil swished through the mouth, what we'd now call oil pulling, is recommended to draw out toxins. To modern eyes, it sounds unscientific. Yet modern science now recognizes some of these techniques as modestly effective for gum health and bacterial control. Dental pain was a known affliction. Ayurvedic texts describe symptoms that sound very much like abscesses, inflamed nerves, or gingivitis. Treatments included clove oil, ground turmeric, and pepper. The body was understood as a balance of doshas, and toothache was sometimes attributed to excess pitta, or heat. Thus, cooling herbs were applied. Charcoal made from medicinal plants was used as a brushing agent. In wealthier households, toothpicks made of aromatic wood were carved by hand. Now you are in early China during the Zhou dynasty, around 1000 BCE. Chinese medicine's roots are deep and ancient, and oral care is embedded within the larger belief in qi, the body's vital energy. If your teeth hurt, it is because something is blocked or imbalanced. A practitioner may press acupuncture needles along your jawline or apply heated moxa to certain points to relieve pressure. You are given tea made from chrysanthemum and cinnamon. Some records from the Han period suggest that dental infections were lanced with bronze tools and cleaned with salt or vinegar. Tooth pain is common, particularly among the elderly. Yet dental loss is not always treated as pathology. It is sometimes viewed as a natural decline of one's qi. In rural areas, people are told to chew ginger root or rub their gums with salt. An acupuncturist may trace your jawline with a stylus of polished jade and tell you that your liver is the source of imbalance. It may sound strange to modern ears, but in a world without anesthesia, soothing the body through energy manipulation is often the best one can hope for. And yet, amid all these ancient traditions, there is one discovery that surprises even modern archaeologists. In Mehrgarh, an early Neolithic site in present-day Pakistan dating back as far as 7000 BCE, human remains were found with drilled teeth precisely, cleanly, and intentionally punctured molars using tiny flint drills, someone long before written history attempted what looks very much like dental surgery. No crowns, no fillings, just holes drilled to relieve pressure or extract rot. It's painful to imagine. There were no numbing agents, no sedatives, no metal instruments, just determination and grit. And yet, the fact that it happened at all means someone cared enough to attempt it, and someone else survived it long enough for the bone to begin to heal. All over the ancient world, from Syria to Sudan, teeth reveal hidden histories. Excavated skulls show patterns of wear from diet, disease, and age. Filed teeth appear in early Central American remains, though that's a story for another section. Everywhere humans have lived, they have suffered dental pain. And everywhere, they have tried to understand it, name it, soothe it, or remove it. And yet, despite centuries of effort, no ancient civilization solved the mystery of decay. No one knew of bacteria, of the silent erosions happening behind the enamel. They only knew the pain and the stories they told to explain it. So how much of that ancient pain still echoes through modern mouths? And how many of today's treatments will, one day, look like rituals to future archaeologists? You are seated on a low stool in the corner of a room that smells of ash, beeswax, and animal fat. A curtain of woven linen blocks most of the midday light, but your eyes remain fixed on what lies ahead. A stone-top table, a bronze scalpel, and an assistant heating a small metal rod over glowing coals. You've been told this will help, that it must be done quickly, that the pain will end once the tooth is gone. You're not in a hospital. You're in a backroom of a healer's compound in ancient Rome, around the 1st century CE. The empire has expanded across continents, and its medical knowledge is drawn from Egyptian texts, Greek philosophies, and Etruscan folk remedies. The Roman physician Galen is still a boy, but other learned men are writing about the body and its secrets. Still, when your molar becomes infected, there's no x-ray, no sedation, and no gentle dentist with a clipboard. There is, instead, the dent affects the tooth puller. Your mouth is examined with an iron probe. The healer smells the rot, feels the heat beneath your jaw, and declares the offending tooth dead. There is no saving it. You are given a small cloth soaked in vinegar and cumin. You bite down. It's not to numb you, but to keep your mouth open and discourage infection later. You brace. The tool, part pliers, part hook, is wedged into your mouth with a grunt and a twist. It begins. The Romans were not crude about all things, but when it came to dental extractions, brutality was often the rule. Tooth pulling was common, though often reserved as a last resort. Pliny the Elder describes a number of folk remedies: rubbing crushed mouse skull on the gums, wearing amulets of cured wolf's tooth, or holding a frog against the jaw, but none truly worked. The only real cure was removal, Roman tools for The jaws were forged by smiths who made weapons sturdy, sharp, and unforgiving. Fractured jaws and broken teeth were common side effects, yet Rome also innovated. They were among the first to use dental prosthetics made from gold and ivory. Wealthy citizens might receive dental bridges made of carved bone or even human teeth, bound in place with gold wire. These were not fully functional replacements, they were mostly cosmetic, but they signaled status and vanity even in old age. Smiling with a full mouth, even if your back teeth were gone, was considered noble. As the empire expanded, so did dental knowledge in the Greek-influenced East. Teachings from Hippocrates and later Galen focused on balance, restoring the humors that govern health. Toothaches were thought to rise from excess black bile or from a disruption of body heat. Cautery, burning the gums with hot metal, was sometimes used to rebalance the jaw. Galen himself advocated for removing spoiled teeth to prevent decay from spreading, though his preferred method was careful loosening rather than immediate extraction. Unfortunately, few followed his patience. Travel further east and you'll find dentistry reaching a more elegant, though still limited, form in early Persia and the Islamic Golden Age. Around the 9th and 10th centuries, physicians like Al-Zairawi, Abulcasis compiled surgical encyclopedias that included detailed descriptions of tooth extraction, cleaning, and cauterization. He designed instruments that resemble early dental forceps. His writings, compiled in Kitab al-Tasrif, were translated into Latin and used by European medical schools for centuries. He also warned against careless tooth pulling, noting that some teeth, when poorly removed, left fragments that would fester and cause even greater pain. He advocated for careful shaping of prosthetics and cleanliness of tools centuries ahead of his time. Meanwhile, in India, Ayurveda continued to evolve. Ancient texts like the Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita included entire chapters on oral care. The physician's Sushruta, in particular, outlined dental surgeries, extractions, and even cosmetic corrections. Toothbrushes made from aromatic sticks, like neem and mango, were used daily. Powdered herbs, salt, and charcoal were rubbed on teeth. Gold caps were sometimes placed on damaged teeth for ritual and aesthetic reasons. Dental hygiene was both spiritual and physical. Your breath, your speech, your food were all extensions of bodily harmony. Chinese medicine also preserved and deepened oral traditions. Toothache was still seen as a sign of internal imbalance, but treatment moved beyond herbs and moxibustion. Dental pain was sometimes addressed with acupuncture targeted at jaw meridians. Tools were developed to massage gums and scrape away food. Residually versions of the dental pick, the use of green tea and mint for oral freshness was common. There are even references in some ancient medical texts to rudimentary fillings made of plant resin, mixed with crushed bone or oyster shell, packed into cavities and sealed with warm wax. While not permanent, these efforts show a desire not just to relieve pain but to restore function. And what of Europe in the early Middle Ages? After the fall of Rome, much of formal dental practice receded into folk wisdom and monastic care. Tooth pain was treated with poultices made from herb sage, thyme. Madjura, the mouth was rinsed with strong wine or vinegar. If extraction was required, it was often done by barbers, who doubled as surgeons. You would sit on a wooden stool, tilt your head back, and grip the chair's arms. A rough wedge would be jammed between your cheek and gum, and the offending tooth yanked free in one violent motion. There was little sterilization. An infection was common. Sometimes the tooth broke midway, leaving the root behind. The remedy? More yanking. Despite these crude practices, some early medical texts from monasteries in Ireland and France suggest more thoughtful approaches: compresses soaked in wine, clove oil applied with feathers, and the use of boiled iron tools to cauterize and seal abscesses. It was painful, but it could save lives. Across all these regions, one thread runs constant: people endured the pain. Toothache was a companion in life. Like hunger or cold, people expected to suffer, and when pain became unbearable, they turned to whatever tools or beliefs were at hand: spirits, poultices, pliers, prayers. But not all dentistry was desperate. In ancient Etruria, carved gold dental bridges have been found in tombs, indicating a sophisticated understanding of both aesthetics and oral structure. The Etruscans, neighbors and predecessors of the Romans, fashioned prosthetics using human and animal teeth bound with gold bands. These weren't makeshift solutions, they were crafted with precision, showing that even centuries before Christ, humans sought not just to end pain, but to restore dignity. So if you live with a cavity in Babylon, you might chew warm resin and recite a charm. In Egypt, you might pack the hole with date mash and honey. In Persia, you could see a physician with bronze tools and a quiet, steady hand. In India, you might clean your teeth daily with neem and hope the rot stayed at bay. And in Rome, if all else failed, you would grip a cloth, say a silent prayer to Aesculapius, and let the dentifrice do his brutal work. The history of dentistry is not only about how people treated pain, but how they understood it. Some saw it as divine punishment, others as physical imbalance, others still as something to be tamed through craft and chemistry. But all of them, across the ages, chose to face it. And what does it say about us that even the earliest humans, armed with nothing but bone drills and ritual chants, still refuse to let pain go unanswered? You are waking up in Edo period Japan. It is the 18th century. You stretch, then reach for your toothbrush, not a plastic one with nylon bristles, but a sliver of fine bamboo with stiff horsehair. You dip it into powdered charcoal mixed with ground shell, gently brush your teeth, and rinse your mouth with water infused with peppermint and salt. In the lacquered cabinet next to your mirror rests something remarkable: a full set of wooden dentures, carved by hand, polished smooth, and fitted to your mouth like a second skin. Yes, they are uncomfortable. Yes, they sometimes click when you eat, but they are yours. And when you smile, you look like everyone else. In this era, dental care in Japan had reached a surprisingly advanced form. Tooth extraction was still painful, done with iron pincers, and little more than herbal rinse for numbing, but the Japanese were among the first cultures to produce full dentures for the living rather than just funerary purposes. Made from carved wood, often boxwood, softened with beeswax, and sometimes lined with gold or shell. These dental prostheses were tailored to the shape of the wearer's gums. Some were even fastened with suction techniques still in use centuries later. Monks, artisans, and physicians collaborated to perfect the craft. The mouth was not just a place of decay, it was a stage for dignity. This wasn't the only culture to think creatively about teeth. Cross the Pacific to the Maya civilization, where a very different approach to dental modification was practiced, not as a medical necessity, but as a mark of beauty. Among the Maya, upper-class individuals sometimes had inlays of jade, turquoise, or obsidian embedded in their front teeth. Using rotary tools and a paste of powdered stone and tree sap, skilled practitioners drilled holes and inserted precious gems. These decorations weren't ornamental in the sense of jewelry, they carried spiritual meaning, signifying lineage, status, or divine favor. In some cases, teeth were filed into pointed or notched shapes. While we might once today, there's little evidence of widespread infection. Their methods were cautious, almost surgical. In West Africa, particularly among the Yoruba and other groups, tooth sharpening was practiced for ceremonial or cultural purposes. Children or young adults might have their incisors filed into narrow points, not as punishment, but as a rite of passage or beauty standard. Similar traditions were found in early Southeast Asia and parts of Oceania. These dental modifications were not seen as mutilation, but as enhancement, just as braces or whitening treatments are viewed today in modern dentistry. And that brings us, finally, to a critical pivot point in history, the moment when dentistry became a profession rather than an improvised skill. Entered the European Enlightenment. By the 17th and 18th centuries, as printing expanded and scientific inquiry deepened, a class of specialists emerged. Dentists in Paris, One man in particular changed everything. Pierre Fauchard, a French surgeon born in 1679. Fauchard is now widely considered the father of modern dentistry. His 1728 work, Le Chirurgien Dentiste, was the first comprehensive treatise on dental science. He described tools, procedures, tooth anatomy, causes of decay, and even rudimentary fillings. He rejected the idea of tooth worms, attributing decay to sugar and poor hygiene. He emphasized cleaning, prevention, professionalism. His tools look crude now: pliers, scrapers, drills powered by foot or hand cranks. But he imagined a world where dentistry wasn't reactive, but proactive. He designed bridges, caps, and even braces to straighten teeth. He understood that dental health was part of overall health. For the first time in European medicine, the mouth wasn't just an inconvenient orifice, it was a system to be cared for. This shift changed everything. In the centuries that followed, dentistry became institutionalized, schools were founded, instruments were standardized, the barber surgeon gave way to the trained specialist. Anesthesia first, nitrous oxide, then ether, and finally local anesthetics like Novocaine transformed procedures. From traumatic to tolerable, X-rays unveiled hidden decay. Germ theory explained not only how decay spread, but how to stop it. From 1900 onward, toothbrushes, toothpaste, and floss became everyday tools in growing parts of the world. But as dental technology advanced, history became buried under the assumption of progress. It's easy to think of ancient dentistry as barbaric, a blur of pain and ignorance. Yet that's only partly true. In reality, ancient dentistry tells a different story of resilience, of improvisation, of humans using every available resource: sticks, herbs, stones, prayers, tools to reclaim control over one of the most personal sources of suffering, the mouth. Tooth pain is unique. It's invisible from the outside, but ever present in the mind. It disrupts thought, appetite, even speech. And long before the invention of antiseptics, humans learned to fear it but also to confront it. Take the Romans, who developed metal tools and gold bridges without knowing a single bacterium by name. Take the Egyptians, who stuffed wounds with honey and natron, hoping the sacred chemistry of the gods might ease infection. Or the Maya, who turned teeth into art. Or the Sumerians, who blamed worms but still boiled herbs. Or the Chinese physicians who, without knowing nerves by name, placed needles along energy meridians that often match what we now call trigeminal pathways. Even in the Neolithic age, 9,000 years ago, someone somewhere took a stone drill and leaned into a screaming mouth, not out of cruelty, but care. And for every broken tooth, there was someone who tried to fix it, not always well, not always gently, but always with intention. Today, we lie back in leather chairs, watching ceiling TVs, while ultrasonic scalers buzz away tartar. We wear invisible aligners and get titanium implants. We can be numb, scanned, capped, and crowned. And yet, beneath the sterile light, the fear is the same. The hope is the same. The desire to smile without pain, to eat without dread, to live without that pulsing ache. It connects us to everyone who ever chewed warm bread and winced. Dentistry may be a science now, but it began as a form of compassion. So the next time you brush your teeth, consider the hands that came before, calloused, steady, unsure, holding bronze tools in dusty rooms, murmuring prayers to drive out invisible worms, hoping they could help, even just a little. And what forgotten names deserve credit for those first brave drills? Those strange herbal pastes, those carved dentures that let the dead greet the gods with a full smile. How ancient people dealt with broken bones and morite might have happened at the edge of a stone terrace, or while hauling a water jar from a riverbank. Or maybe it was a chariot wheel that collapsed beneath you, flinging you sideways with the force of a thrown javelin. Either way, you've landed badly. The pain is immediate and sharp. Your arm bent in a way that arms should not bend. You've broken a bone, and it's the year 2000 BCE. There are no hospitals, no sterile bandages, no titanium pins, no plaster casts. What comes next depends on where and when you are. Let's start in ancient Egypt, where the Nile flows like a slow breath and medicine is both practical and mystical. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, one of the earliest medical texts known to history, dates back to around 1600 BCE. It describes bone fractures with surprising clarity. If you're a laborer injured on the work site of a pyramid or temple, a local SW&W, trained healer might examine your arm. He assesses whether the bone is open or closed. If it protrudes through the skin, the prognosis is poor. But if not, he carefully manipulates the limb, using linen bandages stiffened with resin or gum to splint it in place. He may speak words to the gods, especially Thoth or Sekhmet, as he works. You're told to rest. That's not always easy. Time off means lost food, lost wages. But family steps in. You might lie in the shade near the wall of your home, arm suspended by a sling of papyrus fiber. Neighbors bring water. Children stare. The heat rises. Slowly, over weeks, the bone knits. Evidence from mummified remains shows fractures that healed well, though not always straight. In some cases, ancient Egyptians aligned bones well enough to allow full use afterward. In others, bones fused at odd angles. The human body, even without surgery, often finds a way to repair itself if it's given half a chance. Now imagine you're in ancient Mesopotamia around the same time. Cities like Ur and Nineveh rise from the dust with ziggurats, casting long shadows. You've broken your leg falling from scaffolding. A healer is called not just one, but two kinds. The Ashu, who deals with physical remedies, and the Ashipu, who handles incantations and omens. The Ashu examines the leg. He may apply poultices of hot clay, wrapped with linen, or even fashion a rudimentary splint from woven reeds. He'll tell you not to walk, but there's more to do. The Ashipu recites prayers to ward off evil spirits, because illness and injury are still seen as the work of divine forces or vengeful ancestors. Your recovery becomes both a medical and a spiritual process. Offerings are made. Dates and barley porridge are brought to you by your family. You rest in the corner of the home, while the clay hardens around the leg, forming a shell of sorts. The pain remains constant, but in time, the swelling fades. The splint is removed. You walk slowly, stiffly into the next chapter of your life. Move now to India, where the texts of Ayurveda are being passed from teacher to student orally and in early manuscripts. Sushruta, the legendary ancient Indian physician, writes extensively about bone injuries. In his Sushruta Samhita, he categorizes 6 types of fractures and 6 kinds of dislocations. He doesn't just recommend rest, he instructs on traction, reduction setting the bone, and immobilization. He even includes instructions for crafting splints from bark, bamboo, or cloth soaked in oil and resins. If your tibia is broken while working in a field, the local healer may first massage the area with warm oil to relax the muscles. Then, 2. Assistants hold the leg while the healer gently realigns the bone by hand. It is agonizing but swift. The splint is wrapped tightly. You are told to rest, to avoid cold foods, and to follow a diet that supports internal healing. Sometimes, herbal tonics rich in calcium or anti-inflammatory compounds are prescribed. Ayurvedic medicine sees the bones as governed by the Vata dosha associated with air and space, and so healing must restore balance and warmth. While the language may sound alien to modern ears, the treatments were grounded in detailed observation. Evidence suggests these healers had intimate knowledge of muscle, nerve, and skeletal systems, even if they lacked the terminology we use today. Now, let's move to ancient Greece, the cradle of Western medicine. Around 400 BCE, Hippocrates writes not only about humors and ethics, but also about trauma. His works include descriptions of setting dislocated joints, of applying bandages soaked in vinegar, of using weights to apply traction to a broken limb. He even details spinal injuries, though these he admits, are often fatal. You're a hoplite. Wounded in battle. Your forearm was struck by a shield. The bone fractured. The camp physician examines it beneath a fig tree. He applies pressure, aligns the bone, and binds it tightly using linen soaked in wine. He may use wooden slats or leather straps to immobilize it. You're ordered to drink a broth of marrow and herbs. Rest is enforced. Greek doctors often operated on battlefields and in gymnasia. They observed thousands of athletic and military injuries and developed a practical, flexible approach. They did not open bodies. Dissections were taboo, but they learned from the outside in. And what they learned, they wrote down. Hippocrates' techniques were later preserved by Roman physicians like Galen and passed into medieval Europe. Crossed the sea to ancient China, where medicine flows along different lines. The Yellow Emperor's classic of internal medicine discusses fractures and swelling. Here, treatment is intertwined with qi, meridians, and the balance of forces. A healer in Han Dynasty China may apply a splint but also acupuncture to redirect energy around the injury, stimulating healing. Bone setters, known as Dada specialists, evolve into skilled technicians of trauma care. You've broken your collarbone after slipping on a wet stone. A healer comes with a bundle of linen, strips of bamboo, and a pot of pungent herbal paste. He sets the bone with firm pressure, binds it, and applies moxa, a burning herb that warms the area to disperse stagnation. Recovery is monitored, not just through pain, but through pulse reading, tongue color, and overall energy. A balance must be struck between rest and movement. You are not just healing a bone, but a system. China's tradition of bone setting would survive into the 20th century, influencing martial arts schools, village medicine, and even modern sports clinics. Their methods gentle, precise, patient to remind U.S. that knowledge of the human body was never the sole province of the West. Finally, peer across the ocean to Mesoamerica. Archaeological evidence from the Maya and Aztec worlds include skeletons with well-healed fractures, suggesting that even without written medical texts, care was administered. Shamans and midwives, known as tissetal, were responsible for trauma as well as childbirth. Bones were wrapped in bark cloth, splinted with cane or wood, and anointed with resin or chili poultices. Pain was managed through tobacco, cacao, or fermented drinks. Spirits were invoked. Offerings made. Here, medicine was community-based. You were never left alone in your suffering. Elders gathered. Family cooked special food. The healer visited each day. Healing was social, even sacred. All these cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, saw bones not just as breakable stakes inside the body, but as symbols of structure, balance, and endurance. They feared breaks, but they did not flee from them. And the question is, without scans, anesthesia, or even a word for orthopedics, how did so many of them get it right? You are lying on a reed mat in a dimly lit hut. Your arm is splinted and bound. Your fingers slightly swollen. Your breath shallow. Outside, the village is stirring, early morning chickens clucking. Water being drawn, but for you, time moves slowly. You're injured and you're healing. But the journey back to movement will not be swift or painless. In every ancient society, the period after a bone is set was as critical as the injury itself. Healing was slow, and there was always the risk of it going wrong. Bones might knit out of alignment. Infections could spread. If the limb remained immobile too long, it might seize up completely. And yet, over centuries, a quiet profession emerged, the bone setter. Bone setting as a practice was often separate from what we think of as medicine. It existed in every culture, but outside temples, academies, and state-approved institutions. It was an inherited craft passed from father to son, or grandmother to granddaughter. You didn't become a bone setter by reading scrolls. You became one by watching 1,000 injuries and learning, by feel, how to coax the body back into its shape. In medieval Europe, long after the fall of Rome, bone setters continued to practice, often in rural villages or among traveling healers Monasteries preserved some Greco-Roman texts, but few had formal training in anatomy. Yet they had techniques binding with cloth dipped in egg white and flour, creating hardened shells similar to modern casts. In Ireland and Wales, bone setters were semi-sacred figures, called upon to handle injuries that no priest or barber surgeon would touch. They used wooden splints carved from hazel, pressure techniques passed down orally, and herbal salves to soothe inflammation. You might have broken your ankle in a fall from a cart. A local bone setter would be summoned, often a woman in her 50s with gnarled hands and decades of experience. She'd feel your bones without needing to see them. She might mutter old phrases, half prayer, half spell, not from superstition, but tradition. Her fingers would guide the bones back into place. The pain would be unbearable, and yet she knew what she was doing. The limb would be wrapped, suspended, and you'd be told to move only when the swelling subsided. In China, the role of Daida masters expanded during the Tang and Song dynasties. These were trauma specialists, respected, itinerant, and methodical. They used careful traction methods, applying consistent, steady force to ease bones back into alignment. Their treatments combined manipulation with herbs, some to reduce bruising, others to promote circulation or soothe nerve pain. You may have broken your wrist while carrying rice baskets across uneven stone steps. The Daida practitioner would arrive with a bamboo case of oils and sticks. He would warm your wrist over steam, use gentle pressure to move bones back into place, then bind it with bark or wax cloth. He might prescribe a daily tea of dried root and flour. He would tell you, the bone must remember its shape before it finds its strength, and you would believe him. In Africa, oral traditions and empirical knowledge created robust local systems of fracture care. In parts of West Africa, especially among the Yoruba, bone setters were deeply respected and even consulted by colonial surgeons in the 19th century. They used splints made of raffia, bark, and padded wood, and they treated fractures with poultices made from snail slime, palm oil, and ground herbs. Their focus was holistic, setting the bone, restoring function, and ensuring spiritual balance. Recovery was as much about community as it was about bone. A broken limb meant you couldn't work, travel, or harvest. Others stepped in. Meals were brought to you. You were moved closer to the fire. Children were taught to bring water. You were still a part of the social world even if your bones had temporarily stepped out of line. In the Islamic Golden Age, particularly from the 9th to 13th centuries, scholars in Baghdad and Cordoba began synthesizing Greek, Roman, Indian, and Persian medical knowledge. The works of Hippocrates and Galen were translated, critiqued, and improved. Physicians like Al-Zairawi not only documented surgical techniques, but also sketched orthopedic devices, splints, traction tables, even early forms of cast braces. Using wax and linen, if you broke a femur in 11th century Al-Andalus, you might be treated with traction and wrapped in cooling compresses of vinegar and herbs. A physician would observe swelling, palpate the limb, and guide assistants to stretch the leg slowly until the bone ends align. You'd then be wrapped tightly in a cast-like brace and prescribed a diet rich in marrow and dates if fever came. They would drain abscesses, clean wounds with rose water or honey, both recognized antiseptics. What's astonishing is how much they understood about complications. Al-Zairawi warned of false joints, non-unions, of bone splinters that might embed in flesh, and even of muscle atrophy. Long before x-rays, doctors knew the consequences of poor alignment and lingering trauma. Elsewhere in the world, the Inca and pre-Inca civilizations of South America also demonstrated bone-setting techniques, even amidst their high-altitude terrain. Archaeological evidence shows complex healed fractures in skeletons, including femurs and forearms. Some scholars believe splints were fashioned from llama bones or tightly wrapped reeds. Herbal applications were common. Extracts from coca leaves or chili peppers may have helped with pain and inflammation. In Quechua oral traditions, healing was tied to rhythm, touch, and earth spirits. The bone was not just a body part, it was a line connecting the living to the ancestors. And across all of these traditions, something else becomes clear. People weren't just recovering, they were adapting. Archaeologists have found skeletal remains showing healed but deformed bones. These were people who likely limped for life, whose arms never fully straightened again. But they survived. They kept living. In some cases, they continued laboring. Tools were modified. Tasks were shifted. A one-armed farmer might now carry water instead of plowing. A limping soldier might become a village guard. Pain did not mean uselessness. Recovery was not perfection, it was participation. In modern medicine, we often prioritize the return to normal function. But ancient healing often aimed at something simpler: survival and inclusion. The goal was not to erase the injury, but to help a person live with it. And yet, how did ancient people know which injuries would heal and which would not? How did they decide when to risk a rubric or when to leave it as it was? You're walking again slowly, with a hitch in your step. The bone is healed, but not as it was. There's a slight bow to your shin, or maybe your arm doesn't straighten fully anymore. The injury has faded from pain into memory, and it's clear now. This mark, this twist in your bones, will be with you for the rest of your life. In the ancient world, a healed fracture didn't always mean a full recovery. It meant adaptation. It meant living with a reminder. Across continents and centuries, skeletal remains show the results. Tibias fuse at odd angles, humeri with thickened shafts from years of compensation, collarbones that healed into ridges. Ancient people didn't always get bones back into perfect shape, but they got them back. And in that, they achieved something remarkable. They preserved function when survival was already a daily challenge. But how did ancient cultures cope with imperfect healing? Let's begin in ancient Greece, where athletes and warriors were a cultural obsession. An injured soldier, one who limped, who couldn't raise a shield properly, might become a trainer, a judge at the gymnasium, or caretaker of temple grounds. A hoplite who couldn't march could still advise younger fighters. Physical imperfection didn't necessarily cast a person aside. In fact, experience became currency. A misshapen leg didn't erase a life of service, it gave it weight. In Rome, where military discipline ruled, legions sometimes assigned injured veterans to support roles: guards, scribes, or trainers in the field. Roman law included pensions for disabled soldiers, missio causaria, and some temples honored injured veterans with small dedications. Bones that bore the signs of trauma became symbols of loyalty and endurance. In India, Ayurveda taught that the process of healing was not about restoring the body to its perfect state, but realigning its internal energies. A broken limb that healed imperfectly was not a failure, but a new equilibrium. Certain mantras were recited not just during treatment, but long after reminders that health was ongoing, that the body was a vessel of constant motion and adjustment. In China, long-term healing incorporated physical therapy in subtle forms. Patients recovering from fractures might be encouraged to practice gentle Qigong movements to maintain flexibility and prevent stiffness. Bone setters sometimes returned weeks or months after treatment to re-examine the area and adjust the splint or offer massage. Acupuncture wasn't just for pain, it was for retraining movement. Healing was never just a one-time event. It was seasonal, cyclical, continuous. In Africa, where medical care was tied to community, rehabilitation was embedded in social reintegration. Those who couldn't return to heavy labor might shift into oral storytelling, religious roles, or craft work. One person's weakened arm became another's wisdom, a different way of contributing to village life. Stories passed down about bones breaking often carried symbolic weight. The limb was not lost, but transformed. Consider, for a moment, the bones themselves, those silent witnesses to ancient trauma. Archaeologists routinely uncover evidence of injuries that must have involved extraordinary pain. Shattered femurs, crushed wrists, even spines with compression fractures. And yet, These bones also show signs of survival, regrowth, remodeling, healing. Someone cared for those injuries. Someone wrapped them, fed them, protected them. Because in every case of a healed bone, one quiet truth is clear. Someone helped dot in. The Neolithic Alps. The 5,300-year-old body known as to the Iceman shows signs of past injuries, rib fractures, cuts, and a healed wrist. In his final days, he was likely running or climbing with an arrowhead buried in his shoulder. Yet before the final trauma, he had lived through hardship and survived. His healed bones tell us so. In ancient Peru, among the Moqui and Inca skulls, have been found with repaired fractures and trepanation holes, intentional surgical openings in the skull. In some cases, the bone had regrown around the hole, indicating the person lived weeks or months after the procedure. These were not haphazard acts, they were interventions. Someone tried to help. In Egypt, mummies from Thebes and Saqqara show not only healed fractures but orthopedic prosthetics, wooden toes, shaped sandals, supportive bindings. The message is clear. The injured person wasn't discarded, they were accommodated. Even prehistoric Homo sapiens, living tens of thousands of years ago, demonstrate patterns of survival. In a cave in Shanidar, Iraq, archaeologists found the skeleton of a man missing part of his arm, with a crushed eye socket and severe leg damage. And yet, he lived long enough for the bone to heal. His tribe must have fed him, protected him, moved with him. In an age of predators and raw survival, compassion carried as much evolutionary weight as strength. So why does this matter? Because we often imagine the past as a brutal place, cold, harsh, dismissive of the weak. And yes, it could be brutal, but the evidence in the bones, in the healed fractures and the crooked limbs, tells a different story. A quiet one, a story of care. Ancient bone care wasn't perfect. Limbs healed bent, pain lingered, infection sometimes won. But over and over, people tried. They used bark and linen, bronze and bamboo, vinegar and clay. They reset joints by hand. They waited, they watched, they learned. And somewhere in every village, on every road, in every campfire circle, there was always someone who knew how to feel along a swollen limb and say, it can be fixed. So next time you see a crutch, or a cast, or a scar that runs alongside the curve of an arm, remember this: your ancestors had those too, and they carried them with pride, or silence, or quiet gratitude for the ones who helped them walk again. Because sometimes healing isn't about returning to who you were. It's about becoming someone who made it through. How medieval monks track time before clocks, and more you rise from a thin straw mattress to darkness soft as wool. In the dormitory, the only light is a single ember glowing in a wrought iron brazier. But you do not need sight to know the hour. The porter's steady footsteps have begun their measured round, tapping ash staff against stone exactly 12 times. It is the summons to matins, the first office of the night, and all around you brothers push back blankets, murmur brief prayers, and shuffle into the chill. No bells yet, those will come later. For now the monastery tells time with footsteps, breath, memory. Outside, frost creaks on cloister roofs. The year is about 1100 CE, decades before Europeans will hear of the verge escapement or the mechanical drum. In this Benedictine house on a Northumbrian headland, time is not divided by gears but by ritual, 8 canonical hours, each a seam in the fabric of day, stitched with psalmody and silence. Keeping that fabric straight is the quiet duty of the sacristan, part practical engineer and part liturgical guardian. He carries no watch, yet his life is ruled by measurements of wax, of water, of shadows, so that prayer never drifts far from its appointed shore. After matins the brothers file to the choir. The tall candles already stand on the lectern, their wicks trimmed to identical length earlier at dusk. Wax is precious, each inch marks minutes. The sacristan, who trimmed them, knows by long habit how quickly this batch will burn on a still winter night, a finger's breadth every 23 chords of the Psalms. If the wind rises and drafts curl through the high lancet windows, flame gutters, rhythm shifts. He listens as they chant. Text becomes metronome and adjusts the pacing. With subtle gestures to the cantor, lengthen a refrain, omit a verse. Time here is elastic yet exacting. Elastic because it adapts to weather. Exacting because the rule of Saint Benedict warns that lateness is a sin of the body. Reflecting disorder of the soul. Just before lauds, he slips away to the cloister walk and kneels beside a low stone basin fed by a thin copper pipe. This is the house's horologium aqua water clock. It looks unimpressive. A farmer's trough to lead markers. But the sacristan cares for it like relic bone. Last evening, he filled it to the upper notch and loosened the cool plug. Overnight, the water dripped into an earthen jar, lowering the surface toward a second notch. If the men formed from matins to early or late, he would feel shame, not anger at the clock. Perhaps an air bubble in the pipe. Perhaps last night's wind chilled the water, thicken its flow. He flicks ice from the rim, watches the meniscus hover exactly where it should, and exhales a prayer of thanks. By prom, faint gray light dusts the herb garden. Now the great bell in the turret speaks 5 sonorous strokes that roll across frozen fields. To distant tenant farms, the bell rope is knotted where the sacristan's shoulder meets his palm. He judges interval by heartbeat. There is no mechanical striking train, only muscle memory and an internal tally of 60 silent pulses between tolls. Across Europe, thousands of unseen monks perform the same bodily arithmetic, a continent-wide chorus before clocks. Later, while others copy parchment or scour cauldrons, the sacristan tends another instrument, a tall wax santallo candle, scored with black lines from tip to base. This candle clock is his calendar of daylight. He keeps it in a stone alcove shielded from drafts, lighting it at terrace and snuffing it at none. Each line is an hour in high summer, half an hour in midwinter. The rule allows him to shave spacing every solstice so the burn duration stays faithful. To heaven's tilt, brothers tease that he serves to master, son, and abbot, but he knows they are one. Around noon, the sun slides behind a ragged cloud bank. The sacristan walks the south transept, raising his arm as though blessing empty air. Really, he is measuring the noon mark, a wedge of sunlight cast through a small roundel, onto a pale plaster lying high on the arcade. On bright days, this mark splits the day with exquisite precision. On dim days, he trusts a backup hand or glass newly traded from Marsh, Spain. Its bulbs of Venetian glass sealed with pitch. He keeps it wrapped in lamb's wool, turns it only for critical moments, timing the baking in the infirmary's bread oven, pacing the refectory readings so the lector does not drone through the mealtime of the sick. Yet none of these devices works. Alone, each checks the others, forming a lattice of small certainties to span long uncertainties. If the candle burns too fast, the water clock scolds. If clouds hide the sun, the bell rope corrects. The system is imperfect but resilient, like the patch-on-patch sandals the brothers wear. Humble material, careful repair. At vespers you stand beside the sacristan in the bell tower, watching him stir a pot of beeswax over a stub of charcoal. He mixes soot scraped from the chimney into the liquid, darkening it. Then he dips a hemp wick repeatedly until a new candle grows in his hands. Tomorrow's our marker. Each dip cools, hardens, lengthens. The tower window frames a western sky streaked silver pink, and you realize those bands of cloud resemble the wax rings accreting on the wick, the day itself hardening into memory. When the candle reaches the right girth, he smooths it against a board, scores fresher lines with the point of his knife, murmuring the psalms associated with each segment. Time is written, quite literally, into wax. Night deepens. After Compline, the brothers retire, but the sacristan lingers in the cloister garden. He lifts his eyes to Orion climbing the southeast. The constellation's shoulder sits just above the rooftop now. By Lent, it will lean lower. Stars are the monastery's oldest clock holder, even in psalms. And though clouds and candle smoke may conspire against him, he studies them each clear night, etching their progress onto an oaken tablet kept in his cell. He is no astronomer philosopher, only a guardian of hours. Yet his observations will matter to future scholars charting equinox drift and calendar reform. Before he finally sleeps, he checks the water clock once more. Surface grazes the etched mark precisely. Satisfied, he seals the workshop, mutters a last invocation, and steps into the dormitory. Around him, dozens of breaths rise and fall in gentle syncopation, like the slow ticking of a human horologe. Out in the dark fields, peasants may still gauge night time by cockcrow, merchants by tavern closing, thieves by the angle of moonlight on alley walls. But within these cloister walls, time is a living scripture measured, chanted, poured, and burned each monk a syllable in its endless recitation. And as you drift towards sleep beneath the rafters, a question lingers louder than the wind at the shutters, in an age now ruled by precise seconds and atomic pulses. What have we gained and what quiet rhythms have we forgotten since monks taught stone? And wax to whisper the hours, you awaken to the deep bell of prime, still echoing. In the morning mist, the monastery is stirring again. Someone stoking the kitchen fires. You hear the rasp of broom against stone, and beyond the cloister, the sound of geese announcing their displeasure at being roused. You sit up slowly, knee stiff from the stone chill, and find your way to the covered walk where the sacristan is. Already at work, the candle clock has burned evenly through the night. The wax lines match his memory. Today, everything is in its place. And yet, the task of keeping time is never done. It must be constantly recalibrated. In a world without ticking mechanisms, timekeeping is a living craft stitched together with weather, discipline, and a monk's stubborn patience. The sacristan leads you past the chapter house and into a low-roof chamber near the herbarium. This is the monastery's time workshop, though it resembles a storeroom more than a laboratory. Baskets of tallow and beeswax crowd the walls. Wooden racks hold a dozen arc candles of varying thickness, labeled by season, sand-glass bulbs. Padded in cloth, hang in nets near a shelf of reeds and inks, and near the window, fixed carefully in plaster, is a vertical wooden disc, an ancient sundial. He explains that this dial was carved decades ago by an elder brother who'd once traveled to Rome and seen the ancient horologia there. This one was built from scrap oak, rubbed with ash to preserve its markings. It tells the hours not by counting evenly, but by the shifting shadow of a central metal pendomon. The marks on the dial are not evenly spaced because daylight in winter is shorter than summer. Each season demands a different rhythm. The sun is never wrong. Only the tools used to track it can falter. But today is cloudy, and the sundial offers no help. So instead, the sacristan takes you to the bell tower, where the bell monk, another role within the hierarchy of time, prepares the next ring. He is a younger man with strong arms and a furrowed brow. Because pulling a bell is as much performance as duty, the rope must be pulled evenly, and the clapper must strike at a precise arc to produce a clean, deep tone. Too hard, and it jars. Too soft, and it disappears. The sequence of tolls differs with each canonical hour. For terce, the bell is struck 3 times, followed by a pause, then another 3. For sext, 6 times. For none, 9. Not just because of the names, but because the sound itself helps reinforce the rhythm of the day for monks spread across gardens, kitchens, scriptoriums, and outbuildings. It's not just a schedule, it's a chanted signal, a kind of sonic timekeeper. The bell monk turns to the sacristan. Cloudy today, he mutters. The candles fast again. The sacristan sighs. He'd suspected as much. When there's no sunlight to measure by, the indoor clocks can drift. Candles burn faster if the air is dry, slower if damp. Even the oil in the stone lamps near the refectory table thickens with cold. Throwing the flame off by minutes, you realize that timekeeping here isn't exact in the way modern people think of it. It's exact enough a balance between observation, ritual, and practical needs. Too early, and the kitchen isn't ready. Too late, and the rhythm of prayer suffers. But never does anyone expect precision to the minute. Monastic time is fluid but Faithful. At sext, the noontime hour. You walk with the sacristan to the outer gate. From there, he points to a narrow slit cut high in the chapel wall. It's the meridiana, a sun-slit line to mark true solar noon on just one day of the year, the spring equinox. At that exact moment, sunlight streams through the slit and strikes a small brass plate set into the stone floor. He watches it every year. Some years clouds block it. Some years it arrives exactly as expected. This slit, along with star sightings and seasonal growth patterns in the herb garden, helps him keep the liturgical calendar aligned with the cosmos. It's quiet, humble astronomy, not for science's sake, but to keep Easter on the right Sunday. To know when Lent begins, to mark Michaelmas by starlight rather than scribal calculation. By none. The long shadows have begun their crawl across the cloister walk. You sit beside the sundial again, and this time there is light. The shadow strikes just below the 9th mark, off by half a finger's width. The sacristan notes it with a soft hum, then dips his quill and adds the discrepancy. To a scrap of wax tablet, he'll adjust the evening's bell ring by one slow breath. As he does, he speaks quietly about failure, about the pressure of keeping sacred time, of all the roles in the monastery. Few carry as much invisible responsibility. If prayer begins late, the prior will frown. If meals arrive too soon or too late, the kitchen is blamed. But really, it is the timing that must remain constant, and when it falters, the error is a quiet one but heavy. You learn that there have been accidents. One brother once miscalculated the Easter full moon, throwing the entire observance off by 3 days. Another trimmed the candles too aggressively and forced 3 nights of matins to be chanted an hour too early, before dawn had warmed the eastern sky. These aren't punished exactly, but they are remembered. The bones of timekeeping are built on trust. Before Vespers, you help stir wax over a low flame, watching it melt into golden pools. The scent is faintly sweet. The sacristan tells you that in some monasteries, our candles were made to be edible in times of famine. Wax scraped from the altar for desperate nourishment. A brutal act, he admits, but a meaningful one. The merging of time and survival. And when the bell rings again, slow and measured, you hear more than sound. You hear the weight of a dozen instruments, flame, water, shadow, star, all aligning in that moment. A kind of mechanical poetry, older than machines. And yet you wonder, what happens when the bellkeeper falters, when the sacristan dies, when cloudy skies stretch for weeks, and none of the old tools can be trusted? You wake in the middle of the night to a different kind of silence. Not the calm hush of sleeping monks, nor the soft creak of wind across the cloister beams, but a strange stillness, as if time itself has forgotten to tick forward. You sit up, listening. No bell, no footsteps, no breath but your own. As the sacristan overslept. It happens more often than they care to admit. The sacristan is aging. His knees ache, his sleep deepens, and when the bells fail to ring, the entire monastery drifts off kilter. Someone will stumble late into matins. Kitchen ovens will be cold. The cantor will forget which psalm was meant for dawn. When time is kept by bodies, bodies eventually break down. That morning, the prior calls a meeting. There's a decision to be made. A visiting abbot from Cluny has brought news from the continent. Some larger monasteries, wealthy abbeys like St. Albans, and since have begun experimenting with mechanical clocks. Not just water clocks or candle hours, but actual geared machines, driven by falling weights, measuring time with balance and motion. A kind of artificial sacristan that never sleeps, never tires, never forgets. The community is divided. Some fear these devices may draw attention from the sacred rhythms set by God's creation, the sun, the stars, the tides. Others are curious. Could a machine uphold the rule better than a man? The first such device arrives a year later. It's not elaborate, just a wooden framework with iron gears and a crude escapement mechanism. The escapement is the heart of it, a kind of control-release system that lets weights drop slowly. pushing the gears one tick at a time. No one here fully understands how it works, but when assembled and wound, it produces sound a gentle click, followed by a strike of a hammer on a small bronze bell. The first mechanical time in the monastery is born. The sacristan watches without resentment. In fact, he helps install it. He weighs the stones used for the falling weight. He oils the pins with goose fat. He even suggests where to hang it, beneath the bell tower's shadow, where wind won't interfere. He is not being replaced. He insists only aided. And for a time, the new clock is a wonder. It strikes at almost the right moment, not perfect, but close enough for the choir to begin their chants without glancing at the candle lengths. The water clock is retired. The arcandles are still made, but mostly ceremonial now. The sundial is consulted less often, thus collecting on its face. Time is now contained in a box of wood and metal. But something changes. The clock begins to drift off by 2 minutes, then 4, a gear loosens. The bell strikes early at terce and late at none. Adjustments are made daily, but the monks begin to trust it anyway, even when they shouldn't. They gather for lauds even if the stars say it's not yet dawn. The sacristan mutters that it's not the machine's fault, it's the monk's dependency. They've handed time over to the machine. Outside the monastery, word spreads. Townspeople begin to ask if they can hear the bell too. A merchant donates silver to cast a larger one. Soon, villagers are setting their days by the abbey's clock. Time seeps beyond cloister walls, becomes public, predictable, profitable. Market days start by bell. Taxes are timed. Wages are calculated. The sacristan, now nearly blind, sits beneath the tower and listens. He can still tell time by the feel of sunlight on his palms, by the shift in bird song, by the scent of warm grass or distant cooking smoke. But the bell now rings even when he forgets, even when he sleeps. The monks do not chant more devoutly. The bread is not baked more evenly. But something in the air has changed. Time is no longer just observed. It is enforced. And beyond the monastery, in cities like Milan and Paris and London, time will soon be carved onto stone towers, gigantic clock faces with hands that march forward in silence. People will begin to divide their lives not by seasons, or candles, or breath, but by hours and minutes, eventually by seconds, and then fractions of seconds. The clock will become king. But in this moment, you sit beside the old sacristan, and he smiles faintly. The machine tells the hours, he says, but it does not understand them. We do. That's our burden and our gift. He turns his face to the morning sky, pale and cloudless, and points with a trembling finger. Look, Orion is gone. It's spring. The bell strikes, and you wonder, quietly, when did we stop listening to the sky and start obeying the clock?